I will call the meeting to order. I want to thank the witnesses for coming forward. We're into our very kind of aggressive and short period of time with pre-budget consultation. We certainly appreciate you coming in. We have a panel of 7 to start in this first half of our meeting. I will introduce you as I yield you the floor. We're in the interest of time. We'll give you 5 minutes, and we'll hope to keep you to that 5 minutes as close as possible. So I ask that the witnesses respect that. So we'll start with our first witness. We have the Association Nationale des Éditeurs de Livres. We have with us Pierre Lefrançois, Director General. The floor is yours, 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The Francophone book industry. I know that I only have 5 minutes, so I'll try to respect that time limit. The Francophone book industry is significant in view of both its breadth and diversity, but it's also fragile in many respects. It is worth more than $766 million. It represents more than 10,000 jobs. Quality is there, and diversity is fostered. However, it is a very fragile industry because of the slim market share of Canada on a very aggressive international market, which is exactly why government assistance is so crucial. This is what we are advancing today. In our submission, we believe that there are 4 measures to take. The first, the federal government must protect copyright, which is a driver of creation and which is a fundamental pillar in publishing. As we say in our submission, we also have to be very careful of the educational exception. We are highly concerned with the possible materialization of the educational exception. Second, we have to oversee the strategic alignment of Francophone publishing within the digital world under existing adaptation and development programs, and make sure that Canada takes its place among the giants of the publishing world. We need to seek content, build platforms, and make them available to international users. We believe that Canada must make sure that Francophone as well as Anglophone publishing benefit from the best technology possible. And therefore, targeted initiatives have to be launched in order to help individual publishers as well as the Canadian publishing sector as a whole. The publishing sector in Canada also suffers from a very low profile. What can we do to make sure that Canadian books get into Canadian hands, that they call the attention of Canadian media, that they get into Canadian schools? This requires significant marketing efforts. And lastly, what we are endorsing, and this is my last point, we endorse the idea of a large-scale translation program of all books, of the highest number of books, in order to represent the various components of Canadian society, so that Aboriginal language, French language, and English language books can be translated into other languages and be known by the public, so that we have a way of transmitting Canadian values, which lies at the very strength of our identity. This also lies at the heart of our economy. It also facilitates the exchange of rights on international markets. It allows for Francophone publishers to deal with Chinese publishers, dealers from Eastern Europe. And it also allows for a contribution to be made to the rights markets, given the expanding international markets. it is an important avenue for French language publishers. On that note, Mr. Chair, I wish to thank you.
Thank you very much. I certainly appreciate your contribution to the committee. We'll now move on to our second witness. We have the Chief Executive Officer of the Association of Universities and Colleges of Canada, Claire Morris. The floor is yours, 5 minutes.
Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie de nous avoir invités.
Mr. Chair, I want to thank you for allowing us to appear before the committee today.
Canada is a wealthy, highly developed country with enormous promise. However, over the next decade, Canada faces important labour market competitiveness and demographic challenges. Ensuring the country's long-term economic growth and continued prosperity will depend heavily on the education and skill levels of Canadians and their success in creating and applying ideas and knowledge. Challenge number 1. Canada must produce enough highly qualified graduates for the needs of the labour market. The talents, knowledge, and skills of master's and doctoral graduates are widely recognized as key drivers of the knowledge economy, as they transfer knowledge from universities to other sectors and inject innovation into the economy. AUCC estimates that by 2016, an increase of at least 35% in the domestic production of master's and doctoral graduates will be required to meet the growing demand for these highly skilled people and replace those who will retire. The proportion of the Canadian population holding an undergraduate degree is at record levels, and the number of prospective graduate students in other countries intending to study abroad is increasing. Canada must attract more domestic students into graduate programs and attract more top international graduate students to fuel Canada's pipeline of highly qualified personnel and strengthen economic and diplomatic ties abroad. AUCC recommends increased financial support for both Canadian and international graduate students in order to attract top students from abroad, keep talented students in Canada, provide opportunities to hone their research skills, and increase their contributions to the labour market through postgraduate internships and co-op placements. Challenge number 2. The Canadian economy is increasingly dependent on international trade, a highly competitive, innovative, and knowledge-driven enterprise. Sustaining Canada's leadership in public R&D performance is key to meeting Canada's competitiveness challenge. In the university sector, public investments support the 4 foundational elements of research: new ideas, highly qualified research talent, cutting-edge research infrastructure, and institutional support for the research effort. The least visible and least understood of these is the support for institutional or indirect costs of research. These are real costs that universities must meet to create the conditions for research excellence. They include the costs of operating and maintaining research facilities, managing the research process from preparation of proposals to accountability and reporting, complying with regulatory and safety requirements, managing intellectual property, and promoting commercialization. Numerous studies have demonstrated that for Canadian and American universities, these costs are at least 40% of their direct research costs. In the U.S., the median negotiated rate of reimbursement is 52%. In Canada, the overall rate of reimbursement in the federal indirect cost program is about 25%, placing Canadian universities at a significant disadvantage. AUCC recommends renaming the current indirect cost program as the Canada Research Competitiveness Fund and supporting it at internationally competitive levels in order to maximize returns on public investments in university research and derive full value for Canadians. AUCC remains committed to improving the visibility, accountability, and transparency of federal investments in this area. Le troisième défi découle du fait.
Challenge number 3. In 10 years, a higher number of Canadians will depend on a lower number of workers. In order to counter this demographic problem, Canada must increase its labour pool, as well as increase its productivity. In order to achieve this goal, we have to increase the level of education for the entire Canadian population, with particular emphasis on access to university for groups that have traditionally been underrepresented. Canadians are becoming increasingly worried because the Canadian Foundation on the Millennium Scholarship, by the end of 2008-2009, which on a yearly basis provides some $350 million in non-reimbursable loans to students, may not be renewed. The AUCC recommends that the federal government continue to provide students with comparable program, that is financial assistance based on needs, that is non-reimbursable, by placing particular emphasis on improving access to groups that have been underrepresented.
Proposals to the government for investments in each of these three areas. I'll be pleased to share them with this committee once they're finalized. Thank you.
And thank you very much. Now we'll move on to the Canadian Dental Association. We have the president, good Albertan, lives very close to the beautiful riding of Yellowhead, Dr. Darrell R. Smith. Floor is yours, 5 minutes. Just had to put that in.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, honorable members. Thank you for inviting me to address you today. I am the current president of the Canadian Dental Association, and I live and practice dentistry in Valley View, Alberta. If anyone doesn't know where that is, it's in the very northwest part of Alberta. Traditionally, we submit a written brief in addition to this presentation, which we also intend to do this year. But because of the short notice of our appearance, we'll be submitting it after our appearance before you today. It will contain several recommendations that we feel will improve the oral health of Canadians. For today, I would like to focus on one recommendation, which Mr. Andrew Jones, who is with me today, spoke to this committee about last year. We are calling it the Personal Wellness Investment Fund, and it presents a unique way that the financial and tax policies can have in the impact on dental and, well, on health in general. I'd like to start by explaining the context and then give you a few details about how we would see it working. Imagine it is the year 2017 and you've just retired from a satisfying career with a large communication company. You are at a dinner, but just as you're taking your first bite, you hear a nasty crunch and your 20-year-old dental crown drops into your lap. From your dentist's perspective, it's no problem. We already have the technology to replace a tooth with a dental implant. But you would have a problem even today. According to recent polling data collected by the Canadian Dental Association, you and 73% of your peers do not have a plan for dental care beyond retirement. And even if you happen to be in the 27% of people who had given it some thoughts, 2/3 of those people are counting on your former employer to continue to offer post-retirement dental coverage. Unfortunately, that benefit has begun to peter out. In 2006 alone, Bell, Sun Life, Sears, Nortel, and Manulife Financial all announced significant cuts to their dental plans they offer employees post-retirement. Unfortunately, there also is little chance that a public plan will cover you either. According to recent statistics from the Canadian Institute of Health Information, although the proportion of public spending on health care has remained relatively stable, the dental portion has been shrinking steadily, to the point that less than 5% of the $9 billion spent on dental care annually is now publicly funded. In many provinces, this public funding is devoted entirely to children's dental programs, and in many cases there have been cutbacks to these programs as well. Unfortunately for seniors, with the exception of Alberta, which is showing some leadership in this area, only limited public funding goes to maintaining oral health beyond retirement. We also know that Canada is entering a period of accelerated population aging that will see the share of seniors aged 65 and over increase from 13% in 2005 to 23% in 2031. We have a recommendation that's not a cure-all, but would be a step in the right direction. The idea is for the government to create a process that would allow for tax incentives for people to put away funds earmarked for health spending. This would include any legitimate health expenses not covered under provincial health plans. Dentistry, of course, but also perhaps prescription drugs, home care, and the like. We have referred to this fund as the Personal Wellness Investment Fund. Our backgrounder lays out a few possibilities on how this fund might work, and details will be included in our brief. Essentially, we see it as an RRSP or an RESP-like entity. Individuals with a registered fund could make contributions to it during their working years, either out of pre-tax or post-tax dollars with a government top-up. These funds would remain dedicated for health care spending, presumably post-retirement, and the absence of an applicable insurance plan. Some might say that the fabric is already stretched thin. How are people going to put away for an RSP and RESP and a PWIF all at the same time. As we see it, RESP contributions for most people will occur in the early part of their lives. By contrast, the PWIF would probably appeal more to those who have their children have left home and are finished their schooling. So it could work out nicely from both a household spending and a government planning perspective. At the time that our RSP contributions draw to a close, a similar amount of money could simply be switched to a PWIF contribution. As I mentioned earlier, CDA has many other thoughts and recommendations aimed at improving the oral health of Canadians. Because time is limited, we decided to speak to you today about just this one aspect. But of course, we're happy to discuss any other areas of oral health funding either today or at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have the Certified General Accountants Association of Canada. We have Bob Harvey, who's a member of the Tax and Fiscal Policy Committee. The floor is yours, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and honourable members. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today and to address issues that matter most to Canadians, all built around the theme of prosperity. Our brief contains a 4-point plan. I believe it's available on the table to build a more prosperous and competitive Canada. My comments today will focus specifically on tax reform and interprovincial trade. We would first of all like to congratulate the government on the recent speech from the throne and the economic statement. We are pleased to see that the federal government shares our views relating to tax reductions and improved internal trade. The recently announced tax relief plan is a welcome departure to the ad hoc targeted tax cuts and special provisions directed to particular groups or sectors to which Canadians have grown accustomed. This $60 billion plan is long overdue. The government has the fiscal room and can afford to reduce the tax burden. Moreover, economists, business leaders, academics, think tanks, and well-respected national organizations have all been calling for lower taxes, including broad-based tax relief, for several years now. There's consensus. We know that lower personal and corporate income taxes are the key ingredients to more investment, increased productivity, better jobs, and a higher quality of life. So the government's tax relief plan is a step in the right direction. However, CGA Canada does not believe it goes the distance. After years of tinkering with tax legislation, we are left with a system that remains unnecessarily cluttered, complex, inconsistent, and is one that is not serving its purpose efficiently or effectively. We need tax reform, and we need a panel of experts to do the work, to consult widely in a public forum, to debate the issues, and to offer informed, independent advice to the government. The appointment of an expert panel is the centrepiece of our submission. An expert panel would be indispensable to improving Canada's taxation and regulatory regime, developing and advancing Canada's tax advantage in global world markets, ensuring that national prosperity and economic growth are the end result, and reshaping our system so that it is fairer, simpler, more efficient, and competitive. Canadians deserve nothing less. The issue of internal trade has been a long-standing concern to CGA Canada. We have examined this issue from all angles. We have written policy briefs and spoken to the issue before parliamentary committees. CGAs themselves have used the Agreement on Internal Trade to eliminate certain restrictions, such as access to public accounting. We have reached the following conclusion. In this era of ever-increasing globalization, where Canada's exports total $524 billion, representing 36.4% of our gross domestic product in 2006, it is ludicrous that the movement of goods and services across our provincial boundaries still remains a challenge. We are encouraged by the federal government's pledge to play a leadership role in the strengthening of the economic union. We also welcome measures adopted by the Committee on Internal Trade and the Council of the Federation. CGA Canada believes all governments must work together to create a fully functioning and effective domestic market where goods and services move freely. It would be easier and less costly to do business. It would remove obstacles to growing Canadian business, and it would make our economy more productive and more competitive. In short, it would be a tremendous benefit to all Canadians. So here's the remedy we propose. establish a set of open trade principles and an internal trade tribunal, implement panel findings through an enhanced and enforceable dispute resolution mechanism. CJ Canada has joined forces with several other national organizations to seek improved interprovincial trade. We're anxious to work with the government towards this goal. To conclude, we wish to urge the committee to consider the recommendations put forth in our submission, namely appoint a panel of experts to review the tax system so that it is simpler, transparent and fair with low internationally competitive tax rates. Tear down trade and labour mobilities within Canada. Barriers, that should read, I apologize. Other elements of our four-point plan include capitalizing on Canada's knowledge advantage and further supporting small and medium-sized enterprises and entrepreneurs. We believe our plan is reasonable and achievable and would provide a solid base to build a more prosperous and competitive Canada. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time. We welcome any questions that the committee might have on these or other recommendations contained in our brief.
Okay, and thank you very much. We'll now move on to the Canadian Trucking Alliance. David Bradley, Chief Executive Officer. The floor is yours, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Members of the committee, I thank you for the time. In my brief few moments, I'll concentrate on two issues. One, a matter of environmental significance. The other, a matter of tax fairness and competitiveness. We are on the verge of an era of the smog-free truck in Canada. By law, the 2007 model year engines reduce the emissions of particulate matter, a precursor of smog, and which is linked to respiratory disease, by 90%. In 2010, by law, the other major precursor of smog, NOx, will be reduced by 95%. I can tell you that it's not too far-fetched to say that the air coming out of the exhaust of the new trucks is cleaner than the air in most of the cities in Canada at the present time. However, there are some challenges. One, these new engines are much more expensive to purchase, on the order of 7 to 10%. But as importantly, this is just an example of the state of the technology, is that there's a fuel efficiency penalty associated with the new engines. So while we're becoming ultra clean, at the same time our performance in terms of GHG is being denigrated, and that really is a reflection of the fact that we did not have a broad-based policy going forward looking at these issues. We can't obviously survive with a reduction in our fuel efficiency, so what has happened in the industry is they put off purchasing of these new smog-free engines. There was a huge pre-buy in 2006. We anticipate there will be another one in 2009 unless something changes. We can invest in equipment. We must now invest in equipment that's attached to our tractors and to our trailers that will allow us to recoup and enhance our environmental performance. They too don't come cheaply. However, in marrying the two technologies under something we're calling the Enviro Truck Initiative, we can, if only half of the new trucks, heavy trucks that are purchased in Canada each year, meet the Enviro Truck criteria, we would not only see the elimination of smog emissions, the virtual elimination of smog emissions from heavy trucks in Canada. We would see fuel efficiency increase on a net basis by 22%. We would save almost 1.5 billion litres of diesel fuel per year from these trucks, and greenhouse gas emissions would be reduced by 4 million tonnes. This is not a pipe dream. These are real gains that can be made. However, as I indicated, the investment climate present in our industry does not lend itself. The cash simply isn't there for us to be able to move in any sort of a concerted way to the new equipment. If this is all about the environment, what we should be seeking to do is to accelerate the penetration of those new vehicles into the marketplace, and we're suggesting that that be done through a program similar to the Vehicle Efficiency Initiative that was introduced in the last budget for light-duty fuel-efficient cars, or something similar to the Energy Star program, which has worked extremely well for the appliance sector. Now, while we're not sure what the cost per ton is for those other programs, the cost per ton for our program is somewhere in the order of $55 to $75 per ton of GHG removed, which we're told is really very attractive compared to some of the other programs that I mentioned more previously. The second issue is the government has been talking about the need for the provinces who have yet to harmonize with the GST to take their sales taxes, particularly the sales taxes on business inputs, and harmonize those with the value-added goods and services tax, something we agree wholeheartedly with. However, at the same time, the federal government still has some vestiges of its own old, archaic, regressive tax system in the form of excise taxes. Particularly, I'm speaking with regards to the excise tax on commercial diesel fuel, which was introduced in the mid-1980s for the express purpose of reducing the deficit or helping out with the government's fiscal imbalance. Well, we have an imbalance now, but it's the other way, and that tax is not serving any policy purpose other than to generate revenue. And we're arguing that if there is an effort to harmonize provincial sales taxes with the GST, this would also be the time to eliminate the regressive excise taxes on commercial diesel fuel and harmonize those as well with the goods and services tax. Things like lowering corporate income tax rates and those sorts of things are very helpful, obviously, and certainly in terms of Canada's competitiveness worldwide are helpful. However, in a low-margin industry like trucking, they are not particularly helpful. We're not generating huge profits, so to have these sorts of taxes continue to be levied upon our business and our second largest component of our operating costs without any concern for profitability is regressive, and we think it's time to make the change. I thank you for the time. We've submitted our materials previously. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Very interesting indeed. Okay, now we'll move on to the David Suzuki Foundation. We have Pierre Sadik, Senior Policy Advisor, Sustainable Specialist, Sustainability Specialist. The floor is yours, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the members of the committee for inviting me here today. The belief that there's a trade-off between the environment and the economy still exists in some quarters, but this belief is in steady decline. Instead, there's a growing realization that our economic prosperity is closely linked to the protection of the environment as well. We live in a market economy, and whether we like it or not, more and more the economy also determines the quality of the air we breathe and the water we drink. For example, right now many goods that take a very heavy toll on the planet's climate are produced without any charge for the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the final product. Ultimately, the cost of these emissions are borne not so much by the polluters, but by all Canadians in the form of climate change impacts including drought, severe weather events, pine beetle infestation, and West Nile virus. Presently, the economy is often biased in a way that actually makes it the environmentally responsible choice more expensive than the unsustainable choice. That's because the true environmental costs of most products is not reflected in the price that we pay. This means every day most of the millions of purchases that Canadians make end up actually harming the environment to a greater or lesser extent. Now, no one sets out to harm the environment. No one wakes up in the morning and figures they're going to harm the environment. But people do because of the limited choices that they currently have. These millions of environmentally harmful choices are driven right now by the market economy. The market is a powerful force. So why, as an alternative, don't we harness the power of the market instead of trying to change it? It's easier to use the flow of the river than to redirect the river. That way, every time consumers make a choice, they will be making a positive environmental choice as well. We'll have millions of Canadians who feel like environmental champions every day. One obvious way for us to use the market is to put a price on carbon to help rein in climate change. You and I have to pay $90 a ton to dump waste at the municipal landfill. But anyone can dump thousands of tons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere without charge because we have not put a price on carbon. Now, we hear that a carbon price will take a heavy toll on the Canadian economy. The David Suzuki Foundation recently conducted a study that shows that Canada's greenhouse gas emissions could be reduced by 20% below today's levels by 2020 with a carbon price of $75 a ton. The National Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy conducted a similar study for the government late this summer. Both studies found that the macroeconomic cost, in other words, the GDP, of the $75 a ton carbon price is that the GDP would be lower by only 1.1% by 2020 than it would be in the absence of a climate change policy. I think this raises an important question. Is Canada going to forego making a real reduction in greenhouse gas emissions because of a difference of 1.1% in GDP by 2020? Thank you. Those are my submissions.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to our last panelist. We have from SR&ED Tax Credit Coalition, Nathalie Bourque, Vice President, Global Communications. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. My name is Nathalie Bourque. Je suis accompagnée aujourd'hui par l'association.
With me today is the Association of Canadian Exporters as well as the Canadian Association of Information Technology.
Companies from across Canada, covering virtually every sector of the economy. Pardon. Les produits forestiers, les technologies.
Forest products, information technology, pharmaceutical companies, as well as aerospatial companies, as well as defense companies.
R&D dollars spent each year, and our member companies are at the vanguard of some of Canada's proudest business achievements. We're also nation builders through the technologies and the innovations we create that will allow Canada to grow and to prosper. We're pleased that the federal government is committed to modernizing Canada's R&D strategy, as demonstrated through the Competition Policy Review Panel, Advantage Canada, and the S&T strategy. Over the last few months, many industries have suffered tremendously. We believe corporate R&D is in need of assistance through Canada's tax system. In order to enable innovation, we're asking the federal government to enhance the SR&ED SHRED tax credit by making the tax credit refundable. The benefits of making the SHRED tax credit refundable don't end at helping Canadian business grow faster in the global economy. Indeed, it is not being the slightest bit alarmist to suggest that many of Canada's corporate innovators, who provide high wage and quality employment to hundreds of thousands of skilled Canadians, are facing an alignment of forces that is unprecedented in our history, jeopardizing our country's ability to compete. Consider the marketplace dynamics in which Canada's R&D companies are attempting to compete. Low cost and high quality foreign labor, high energy prices, complex non-tariff barriers, and the rapid rise of the Canadian dollar. Now, add to this mix the fact that some of Canada's global competitors offer lucrative enticements to lure Canadian R&D offshore. The SHRED investment tax credit has been the federal government's primary mechanism to stimulate corporate R&D in Canada, but it is underperforming because many companies lack sufficient taxable income to take advantage of the SHRED tax credits. Companies are accumulating pools of earned but unclaimed tax credits. Consequently, this increases the cost of innovation, creates business uncertainty, and undermines competitiveness. Full refundability for SHRED tax credits earned in calendar 2007 and onward would eliminate uncertainty and stop the discounting practice of existing R&D performers, stimulating investments in R&D. Furthermore, since many of the tax credits banked in previous years are on the verge of expiring, we're also asking the federal government to allow companies with bank SHRED credits to use bank credits first to offset taxes applied in 2007. This practice of using bank credits first should be allowed to continue into the years following 2007, thereby allowing companies to empty pools of earned credits gradually and with minimal impact to the federal treasury. As innovators, we prefer to speak in terms of opportunities and possibilities. We turn today's dreams into tomorrow's achievements. But before I talk of opportunity, I would like to share with you some facts. Fiscal 06 was not a good year for corporate R&D in Canada. Last year, companies invested $11.4 billion in R&D, a decline of 3.8% over the year before. Of the top 9 corporate R&D investors in Canada for 06, 6 companies reported decreases in their R&D spending. Research intensity, or R&D spending as a percentage of revenue, dropped 6.9%. These numbers should be seen as a warning sign warranting the federal government's attention. But let's conclude on a note of optimism. To highlight the economic opportunities created by the SR&ED tax credit, a group of leading Canadian businesses commissioned an independent study in 06 that showed for every $1 billion in additional SR&ED tax credit, we create 10,000 new jobs. $200 million in additional tax revenues are generated, and $675 million in new economic activity and other spin-off advantages are generated. A recent Department of Finance paper also demonstrated the net economic gains derived from the tax credits extend beyond the performers, trickling to other firms and sectors of the national economy. Spillovers were calculated to be 46 cents per dollar of tax expenditure. The cost of the credit was estimated to be 36 cents per dollar, a gross economic gain of $1.11 for every tax dollar spent. As Canadian business leaders, we want Canada to become the destination of choice for long-term investment and growth. So we have a vision that Canada peut devenir un centre de R&D mondial.
Canada can become a major global player. We want the government to be well equipped in order to put a stop to the brain drain. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We would like to start with Mr. McCallum. The floor is yours, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. I'd like to begin with Madame Bourque, because for us, I think the SR&ED idea is a good one. We have the idea that it's good to create a Canadian economic advantage. Now we've lost our currency weakness advantage, and the first point would be significantly lower corporate tax rates, and the government followed suit on that in the economic statement. I noticed that Mr. Del Mastro dumped all over our proposal as pandering to Bay Street tycoons, but he may have realigned his view after the government announced that they were going in that same direction. But I think the SR&ED is also possibly creating an important Canadian advantage as the place to do R&D being Canada and we having tax advantages. And we've traditionally believed we have those advantages over the rest of the world. But my question to you is whether these advantages may have been eroding or maybe that is not the reality, and why you think it's important to us for us to move in that direction.
Thank you for the question. I think that when the program was put together, I think companies were making probably better profit. The program is now 20 to 25 years old. Now we are facing not only a stronger Canadian dollar, we're facing companies that are doing business in India, in China, in Brazil, in Germany, in France, where research and development costs are much, much lower than Canada. And I think the program in itself is good. But in order to make sure that Canadian companies have all the incentives to continue to do the R&D here, we have to help them out. Right now, just the 22 companies in the coalition, we are sitting on about $2.5 billion of earned but unclaimed tax credits. Between the 22 of us, we do $3.5 billion per year of R&D, but we can't continue just to accumulate the tax credits. And this is why I think we're losing some of our competitive edge.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sadek, I'm interested in whether you could comment briefly on whether the David Suzuki Foundation has a view as to the leading role that our Prime Minister played at the Commonwealth Conference over the past weekend.
No, I haven't formulated an opinion on that. The Foundation, we may have put out a press release around that, but no, I don't have an opinion on that, Mr. McCallum.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harvey, you're a tax expert, and on the subject of interest deductibility, we had some discussions in the Finance Committee, and I believe 7 experts told us that they thought that the thing to go after was something called debt dumping rather than something called double dipping. And I wonder if you have a view on that issue.
Thank you for the question. I'm not familiar with debt dumping or double dipping specifically, but I can comment that the deductibility of interest and the rules surrounding it are of one of the extremely most frustrating issues that we have to deal with. We would like to see the expert panel that we suggested address this particular issue as well as the many, many other issues on simplification and the other issues we're actually suggesting the expert panel. It's very difficult to know when you're advising a client who asks you, is my interest going to be deductible because I've refinanced, I've done this, that, and the other thing, to give him a solid answer and know that you're absolutely right under those circumstances. It is an issue, however, that our association would be pleased to address, and we can bring more information to the table.
Well, thank you very much. And Ms. Morris, as one who spent more time in university than politics, I certainly have an inbuilt bias in favor of supporting universities. And I know that this government cut several $100 million in funding for both granting councils and indirect costs of research. And it's not obvious to everybody why it's important to Canada to support the indirect costs of research at universities. It's not a particularly politically sexy idea that obviously gets votes. And maybe it doesn't get votes, but can you explain why you think it's important, not just for the universities you represent, but for the country, that there be enhanced government support for the indirect costs of research?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. It is a fundamental part of supporting the research enterprise, and we've long argued, and it's in our brief that you would have received late this summer, that is one of the key components. We have good support to attract talent. We have the infrastructure that is created through the Canadian Foundation for Innovation, the direct costs of research, and those indirect costs are the ones that support the environment in which the researchers work. And if we're going to be truly competitive, or if we're going to attract the best and the brightest researchers and retain them, they need to know they're working in an environment that can support them with those very real costs that I outlined earlier in my statement.
Well, thank you. If you're going to get through to this government on this subject, I think you have to use fairly simple language. So maybe you could explain to us what would be the consequences if there was no support for indirect research. What if the government simply said zero for that? What would happen to the universities, and what would that imply for Canada?
What would happen is that researchers looking at where they're going to be able to do their work would begin to look elsewhere very seriously, because they would be operating in an environment that didn't support them. And the reality is that when the universities don't get fully supported in the indirect costs, they then have to draw from their operating funds and thereby affect the quality of the teaching and the educational process for students. So it's robbing Peter to pay Paul, and it really is such an important part of the whole research endeavor. And when we look at our competitors around the world, they all have recognized the support that's needed.
One last quick question.
Sorry, it's a very complex issue, but your time is gone. Monsieur Crête.
Monsieur le Président.
Madam Bourque, today I think what you're saying is very apropos, very up-to-date. In fact, I formerly sat on the Industry Committee. We had adopted some unanimous recommendations on non-refundable loans and a certain number of tax measures. One of our recommendations was the following: non-refundable tax credits. Now, you say in your statement, you talk about some of the economic advantages, and yet there are some concerns over the costs. Can you talk to us about the advantages if we were to follow suit on your recommendation, and what would happen if we were not to heed your recommendation, because essentially we can't view this as an expenditure but rather as an investment. Can you please elaborate on that? With pleasure, Mr. Klett. Good afternoon. It's been a while. Now, to begin, I think there are two aspects. Firstly, if we do not continue to encourage research and development, companies which are currently global leaders, such as Nortel, CAE, we're going to lose our competitive edge, and we will no longer be in a position to register the profits that we are earning now and make the sales that we are doing now. That is one thing. Secondly, research and development, which benefits a host of other companies. Well, CICAR, for example, is very well known, and it was concluded that for each $1 billion invested, it translated into 10,000 jobs. That represented some $175 million in economic activity, as well as some $200 million in taxes, which goes to government coffers. In fact, research and development has very good benefits. And not only that, we are creating jobs in a huge range of other companies. Nortel has said to me that there's some 1,000 other companies that are able to benefit in the forestry sector, which carries out substantial research. BTB Water, for example, carries out $200 million worth of research. When a mill shuts down, it's the entire village, the entire single industry village that shuts down. Research and development has huge financial spin-offs in Canada. You say that there are vulnerable companies. Can you talk to us about those?
C'est un achat par une autre firme.
What are those mergers?
Public d'achat, qu'elle soit
Buyback mergers, rather. They are friendly buyback mergers. So when a company takes over, there can be harmful effects. For example, suppose a company is bought out by a U.S. company and they decide that in future research and development is going to be carried out in India, China, or the U.S. But when we are unable to benefit from the tax credits, that has a harmful effect on our productivity, and our shareholder, the price of our stocks falls, and it has a fast depreciating effect. Now, you say about the Conservative platform in 2006, it's unacceptable that research and development is only 1.9% of our GDP, and that this figure is lower than other G8 companies and other OCDE companies who invest some 2.3% of their GDP. Now, given these measures, will Canada be able to enter the ranks of other G8 countries? Well, those measures would help significantly. Those who make decisions understand where research and development is. And in fact, it's not the scientists who are making the decisions. And company directors only have one interest at heart, that is profits and shareholder dividends. Now, suppose that there's going to be a major corporate tax cut. You say that many companies are not earning sufficient profits in order to benefit from tax credits in order to carry out research. Now, if I were a company director, and if I were carrying out a research study, and if I weren't reimbursed following 2 years, I don't know if I'd be able to continue such a project. We simply don't have the means to carry out research. There are companies such as Nortel, BTB, Kruger, who are accumulating tax credits that date back 7 or 8 years. We are working in sectors that are highly, highly competitive. So what's going on right now is that companies are going to the banks asking for $100 million. They're paying interest on the loans. And then they turn to the government and say, well, this is the research. Can I now be eligible to credit? How However, that's not possible. For all sorts of reasons, there are sectors that are going through a very difficult time, such as the forestry sector. Information technology throughout the world is also being very hard hit. And it is increasingly, excessively hard in order to benefit from those tax credits. So you were saying that general tax cuts are not enough in order to allow the manufacturing sector in order to commercialize a product at a profitable price. Yes, it would be a good step, but it's not sufficient. Perhaps I can conclude on the pool of tax credits that you talked about. Can you go back on the solution that you were proposing? Now, companies are unable to exploit those tax credits. Can you go into detail? I didn't fully understand. I'll ask Peter Look from Nordel to answer that question.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll be very quick. We're bringing forward the tax person to help explain this. Our proposal is to take the historical pool of tax credits and allow companies to earn them off so that over time the rules have not changed and the companies will stay in Canada and will become profitable and will ultimately benefit from the past. The proposal is to make the prospective R&D credits refundable so that in a fashion what it does is it incentivizes current R&D, it will be done in Canada, and jobs will remain. So very succinct.
Much. We'll now move to Mr. Dykstra. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to move quickly. I've got a number of questions. We have a very good panel here today. Ms. Bork, one of the questions I have for you, and I'll be very, it's one question, and then I'll move on. You've gotten a lot of TV time today, so I'll go quick. We've talked a lot about, and I don't think there's any argument that the SR&ED tax credit moving forward would be a positive thing for industry and business. Obviously, we should not move forward. Like we're talking about an $8 billion investment potentially over 5 years. I would like to think that based on the fact that the finance minister has put a group together to study it and come back with some recommendations, that moving forward without making sure you have the proper plan would not be a wise thing for the government to do.
I would think that the Finance Department also is looking at this very closely. We are in contact with them. Well, you also have to remember that all the money that's put in R&D is also touching universities and all sorts of other programs. Peter, you might...
Me a good, no, that's fine. That's great. Thanks. I just wanted a little bit of acknowledgement there in regard to the fact that we need to move forward, make sure we do the right thing, because we're talking about billions and billions of dollars. So I appreciate that. Moving over, Ms. Morris, I do have to say, I don't recall you mentioning anything about what was in the 2007 budget that identified a number of requests that numerous student organizations, numerous university organizations, numerous university teachers organizations requested in the last budget that they should be there. And, you know, I would like to think that we've made a pretty darn good first step. In fact, probably the biggest step in terms of investment in university and colleges that a government has ever made in one fiscal year. $800 million beginning in 2008 and 9 for provinces and territories to strengthen the quality and competitiveness of education. $35 million over 2 years for scholarships that didn't exist before and health-related studies. Just moving on, $510 million to the Canadian Foundation for Innovation. $120 million investment to Canary Inc. $10 million over 2 years to Canadian Institute for Advanced Research to help Canadian students and researchers participate in leading groundbreaking research on the international stage. It goes on. $85 million per year to the federal granting councils. An additional $15 million per year to cover indirect costs of research. I mean, we have made, I can continue because I'm not even halfway through. The investment that this government has made in universities and colleges is certainly got to be seen as a positive step that finally being recognized after the gutting that the universities and colleges took in 1994 and 1995.
Thank you. I think if you were to look at the press release we issued the night of the budget announcements, and many utterances after that, you would see that we did recognize the investments that were made and deeply appreciated them. I think in coming to the committee today, we were asked to address what are some of the challenges that the country faces as we look ahead, particularly to sustaining a robust tax base. And so our presentation today and the brief that you would have received this summer is very much oriented to the future. But again, I'm happy to send you our comments on the S&T strategy and on the 2007 budget, because we were very appreciative of the gestures that were made.
Oh, I appreciate that. I actually did have a chance to read the presentation that you sent in the summer, and also the press release. I just wanted to make sure, get on the record here, that Mr. McCallum perhaps wants to play a little politics here and suggests that we're not focused on universities, and I didn't want him to use you as a pawn to do that, so I appreciate that. I think I've got a minute left or so, right? I've got Mr. Bradley, I appreciate the presentation you made. I mean, this is a pretty good description of the direction that the industry wants to take and the difficulties that you face. One of the things that I see or that could potentially be helpful to us as a committee, and I know was last year, whenever we had organizations make presentations to us, they often would talk about, well, if you were to implement this strategy in full, it would be, this is how much it would cost. Therefore, it may take multi-year funding to do so. The one thing that if you do have, or if you don't have it today, that would be appreciated is if we were to take some first steps in this direction, what type of numbers we'd be talking about with respect to finance, and the type of percentage impact that would have in terms of removing greenhouse gases off the road.
Sure. I do have a chart that was handed around that in fact does that. It's a little bit complex because we're looking at a variety of technologies, and it's how you package them together. But I will say this to start. Firstly, for us, it's more important that the program, if we're going to see a program, that it be launched sooner as opposed to how long the program should be in place. We've got a very definitive date coming up with the 2010 model year engines, and we would want to avoid a pre-buy situation in 2009. But in the paper that I give you, it suggests that depending on what percentage the federal government was prepared to invest. For example, for a simple package, this would have two or three of the, it would have the smog-free truck plus two or three of the fuel efficiency measures. We're looking at a Government of Canada investment, say at 15% of about $56 million, compared to an industry investment of $320 million. And I give some other examples at 20% and 100%. Probably the best practical example is initially there was a similar program for auxiliary power units in the trucking industry. These are electronic units that keep the engine running as opposed to diesel, and you use those to prevent idling and those sorts of things. And there the federal government invested 17% of the cost compared to the industry's 83%, and that was enormously successful. So for us, we know that billions of dollars aren't going to drop from the sky. We have to replace our equipment at some point anyway. We do have a vested interest in improving our fuel efficiency. What we're talking about is accelerating that investment. I think the government can do that with a rather modest investment that will see significant returns in terms of GHG reduction.
Okay, thanks.
Monsieur Mulcair.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Dans un premier temps, je voudrais que...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Firstly, Mr. Harvey, can you elaborate? I agree with what you are saying regarding a free movement of services. It's something that we simply don't think enough about. The Rome Treaty, which was really a founding treaty, which was a pact within the European community, had called for the free movement of goods and services. So I'd like to know, Mr. Harvey, to what extent have you been able to practice that right among provinces? And is the title CGA uniform throughout Canada, or is there a separate title in Quebec?
I would like to request my assistant, Carol Pressot, who is our Vice President of Government and Regulatory Affairs, to address this particular issue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mulcair, for your question. I'll answer the second question before I answer the first one. And Mr. Pachetti can certainly confirm to you that in Quebec it is recognized as the accredited accountants. In fact, it has just celebrated its 100th anniversary, and its name change has not been completed. In English, it is the Certified General Accountants Association. Now, with respect to public accountability, there are two exceptions here in Canada. In Ontario and in Quebec, we have set limits on public accountability. In Ontario, the provincial legislation is currently being put into effect as we speak. 2 weeks ago, the government of Quebec tabled a bill to give access to those who hold the accreditation that is conferred by the provincial association. Now, in Quebec, we have set out certain terms that apply, for example, to non-profit organizations as well as municipalities. The problem hasn't been entirely resolved. The issue still remains contentious, but we hope that the bill will go through swift passage at the National Assembly. So that means one can do accounting work for the arena in Montreal, but not elsewhere. From what I understand, it's still rather cumbersome. It's very difficult for the regular consumer to understand. You know that I was at the head of the major Quebec association, and I think it's high time that we allow the market to decide such things. Thank you. My question is now for Mr. Sadiq from the David Suzuki Foundation. You talk about standardization of costs. That's a major principle of sustainable development. Now, rather than having legislation that applies to each municipality, should each locality set out its own plan with respect to sustainable development? Because we've always said we need a general commitment, we need a strategy that applies to all public administrative entities as well as some guiding principles. However, here in Ottawa, each department can do what it wishes on its own. So is that part and parcel of the challenge that we're facing now?
Yes, Mr. Mulcair, the absence of a common sustainable development strategy nationally is an impediment to making progress on a number of environmental fronts. Canada has promised in 1992 at an international fora in Rio de Janeiro, the World Summit on Sustainable Development, in 2002 in Johannesburg, South Africa again, and several other occasions to introduce a national sustainable development strategy. And what that is it's a framework, a legislated framework, ideally, for sound environmental governance. And from that would flow a host of environmental benefits in terms of, because the environment, it's trite to say, knows no borders, a host of environmental benefits could flow across the country and be coordinated. So that's certainly something in the way of a policy that's been long overdue and long promised in this country.
Et finalement, s'il me reste encore du temps, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, do I have any time left? My question is for Mr. Bradley. Now, obviously, your initiatives are marvelous, and for those who have experienced traffic on the island of Montreal, we know that there is no 18-wheeler that doesn't go directly through Montreal, taking Highway 40 or 20. So what you're proposing is rather interesting. But let's be honest. Don't you think the problem stems from the fact that the federal government had removed some subsidies for railways, which are far less polluting when it comes to delivering the same merchandise? Don't you agree that if we were to look at those possibilities, we would be able to decrease the pollution that's caused by diesel-running trucks?
No, I would categorically reject that for a couple of reasons. One is that you talked about the fact that this has somehow been caused by a loss of subsidies. The fact of the matter is that rail, for what it does, is probably about 15% cheaper than trucking now. So it's not a price issue. It's not subsidizing the price. It's a service issue. And the railways are simply not equipped to be able to provide door-to-door flexible service the way that trucks do. The other thing that I reject is the notion that these diesel trucks, trucking is the only freight transportation mode whose emissions from their fuel are regulated. And part and parcel of the new smog-free truck in November of 2006, we went to a new ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel with 5 parts per million. You compare that to railway diesel fuel, which is extremely dirty. What the railways, because of what they do, hauling bulky products over
very, very tight.
Yeah, over long distance, they're able to say, "Oh, aren't we great on GHG?" But they're spewing more bad stuff into the air.
Thank you very much, Mr. Passetti. You have 5 minutes, well, 4.5, because I'll give.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick answer. We're going to try and ask a question, cross-question. Mr. Sadik, what do you think about the proposal from the Trucking Alliance on the Enviro truck? You have a little bit of expertise in this field. What's your opinion in?
Well, from what I've heard here today, it sounds quite useful and like it would be quite helpful. I'm very pleased with the criteria air contaminants that Mr. Bradley was talking about, the reduction of the NOx and the particulate matter, and I think that the give and take between rail and truck is going to continue existing for the next little while. In the meantime, we ought to clean up trucks further and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from trucks.
Just because I saw you nodding and my time's limited, I'm just wondering why you wouldn't work more. You know, you spoke about your, the environment affecting the economy and the reliance on it, but why you wouldn't work more closely with some of the groups like the Trucking Alliance? Would that make more sense? So some of the presentations would be easier for us to help make recommendations to the government.
Well, I mean, I'm setting out why we think that putting a price on carbon is important for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. By the same token, we heard Mr. Bradley today say that he'd like to remove a tax from diesel. So to some extent, we don't see eye to eye on all issues, but on those issues,
helped us. That's what my point is as well. Because you have the expertise, we don't necessarily have the expertise, and because we have the various groups, it's tougher for us. But I thank you for your presentation.
Your point.
Thank you. Mr. Bradley, just quickly, in terms of the accelerated CCA that was in the last budget, is that going to help your industry?
No, not at all, because our equipment was left out, which is so often the case that although we're a key part of the supply chain in the manufacturing process, we don't get the same sort of accelerated capital cost allowances that other sectors get. In fact, our capital cost allowance allows us to write off a truck in about twice the time it would take in the United States, for example.
And the fluctuation of the rise in the Canadian dollar, is that affecting your business?
Oh, absolutely.
Because I didn't hear you.
No, I only had 5 minutes. I'd love to be able to talk about that at some point, but we are a reflection, a microcosm of the economy, and we have an unbelievable situation that while we've seen traffic levels decline as the amount of manufactured goods from Canada to the United States decline, we get bigger lineups at the border. We can talk about that for hours.
Great, thank you. Madame Bourque, rapidement, deux questions.
Madame Bourque, I have two brief questions. Do you know how much it will cost us if research and development is refunded to all companies? Secondly, last year during hearings where we had finance officials appear, we were told that the fact that R&D was not subject to tax credits, this was a result of the fact that they feared that companies would invest it elsewhere and not in products that they truly manufacture. I'll ask Peter to answer that question, please.
Thank you very much. I needed to hear the entire question in French first. First of all, with respect to taking the R&D refundability and moving out of the country, under the proposal that we're talking about, that will not happen. And that's because the historical amounts will just be earned off as companies become profitable here in Canada. Secondly, the R&D credit is going to be focused solely, prospective refundability is focused solely on performing R&D in Canada. So that part, I believe, is addressed. In terms of the cost, just to I understand that through the halls of Parliament, an $8 billion number has been sort of floated around. I would really like to correct that. In the last consultation paper, some statistics were given out. I would say that that number per year, even if it were fully refundable on a prospective basis, does not approach that. And it may have been that when they started talking about the $8 billion, it had to do with refundability of the historical credits, which we have actually taken a different path to help this proposal for the better of Canada.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Saint-Cyr. 5 minutes.
Merci, mais je vais continuer.
Mr. Saint-Cyr, thank you. I want to continue on the same subject. I don't know if Ms. Bourque will be able to answer me or her colleague with respect to refundability. I think we also have to look into the future because really credits that are being used now represent tax losses in the future. For example, if we are to give the credits immediately, I'm talking about tax expenditures, pardon me. So if they're refundable now, as the Bloc Québécois has been advancing for some time now, we are really deferring a future expenditure that could be used by the company in the future, whereas we need those tax credits now. When the government refuses to embrace this approach and refuses to refund tax credits for the purposes of research, claiming that it's too expensive, well, they're counting on the fact that companies will never record profits, that they will not go bankrupt. So do you think that when we talk about the cost of this, we should really be looking at a longer-term plan? Ultimately, how much is this going to cost?
Thank you very much for that very good question. Yes, what you're raising is, in effect, the timing of the benefits. And, in effect, most R&D performers are competing in a global economy. And what's really happening here is it's a competition of Canada versus India and China. And those decisions are driven, in effect, by cash. So it's a cash flow driven model that drives many of these decisions. And waiting for the opportunity of 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road before an appropriate incentive comes up when another country may actually offer that type of opportunity today is, I think, a detriment to Canada. The second part is, in incentivizing this, there's also, this is really an opportunity play for Canada. By incentivizing these jobs to stay in Canada, it is for the good of the country. And one of the things that is very important to remember here is if it ends up being good for the country and you can prove that dynamic, it's probably pretty good to spend $8 billion, okay, because that is a rich country's problem, right? So as an overall incentive, we can't look at just the cost, we need to look at the benefits. And we are talking about retaining high-value jobs that have a multiplier effect that also spawn other industries.
Merci. J'aurais une question pour Monsieur Bradley.
I have a question for Mr. Bradley. You've included a diagram, a table of some of the annual savings In your presentation, you say that in 2007, the motors that contributed to GHGs actually consumed more fuel. What does that? How does that compare to future predictions?
The next round of technological advancement in the heavy truck engine will be in 2010. And while it's a little early to tell at this point, the indications that we've received from the manufacturers to date is that we can anticipate that there will be some further slippage in order to meet the smog reduction target in our fuel efficiency.
Dans votre fiche que vous marquez, là, il y a une section où on dit...
In this diagram, there is a section that's the reduction of GHGs, and there's a series of measures. And it says that there's 48 tons. And the motor for 2007, you say that it consumes, that it emits almost no GHGs, but that it consumes a bit more fuels, that it's less efficient. So how much does it produce per year? If we are to draw the pros and cons, to what extent does it reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
NOx and particulate matter does not reduce greenhouse gases. That's why you have to have this combination of other technologies and devices.
The time is gone, so we'll move it on. Maybe you'll get some more questions on that line. Mr. DeMastro, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask some questions of Mr. Harvey. To begin with, I'm glad to hear that the CGAs are positive on the economic statement. I did, in fact, read the release that was produced by the CGAs following the October 30th economic statement. But I wanted to ask specifically, you raised an issue with respect to, and by the way, I agree that we do need some a comprehensive study on the way that we collect taxes in this country. And I think that was the original goal by the Finance Committee. We did get a little bit sidetracked and talked about the dollar, but that really was what the committee wanted to talk about in its pre-budget. We have a number of barriers within Canada to trade, domestic trade barriers, and you mentioned that. And I was wondering if you might make some comments on the TILMA agreement between Alberta and BC and talk about how an agreement like that might benefit Canada as a whole.
Thank you very much. Again, I'm not an expert on the TILMA agreement. I'm happy to be residing in British Columbia next door to Alberta, so I have, of course, heard some of the information about this particular agreement. It did come into effect, I believe, 4.5 months ago. On a day-to-day basis, we don't see very many results, but we are very happy that our two provinces have undertaken these steps and that they are working towards freer trade between our two provinces. It does create a much larger economic union between the two of us. We were, of course, also pleased to hear the announcement yesterday from Ontario and Quebec, and it was very interesting to us that both premiers suggested that they need the federal government's help in order to make their negotiations on free trade between their two provinces effective. So
very briefly, does it make any sense that trade is freer north-south than it is east-west?
It needs to be free in both directions.
Couldn't agree more. The second question I wanted to ask you related to some of the tax implications that we have in the province of Ontario and certainly the province of Quebec, and I'm not certain, but I believe BC as well, which is a system that actually taxes investment into capital equipment, for example, trucks, where a company would have to pay the PST to actually buy that capital equipment rather than taxing the outcome or the production from that equipment. So I wanted to ask you about a harmonized sales tax and ask you if the CGAs have a position on HST.
Thank you for the question. In British Columbia, we have a provincial sales tax similar to some of the other provinces. There are no input tax credits, so it is an upfront tax which is an impediment to investment. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Our committee has not specifically addressed this issue. However, speaking personally, harmonization of GST with PST in British Columbia anyway would carry a tremendous number of advantages for individuals like myself and my clients who are in small business, and it would by harmonizing the tax base to begin with, it would be much easier for us to deal with. So I believe we would certainly support that.
Okay, I just had a question for Mr. Sadek as well. Mr. Sadek, there was a mention earlier of removing excise taxes on fuels that were put in place to eliminate a deficit. The Rail Association has also spoken to me personally about an excise tax that they pay that's actually a road tax that they don't feel that they should be paying. How would the environmental community react if we were to remove excise taxes on fuel?
We wouldn't have a problem with the removal of excise taxes that were initially earmarked for deficit reduction, but we would suggest that in order to protect the environment and the health of Canadians, a carbon content tax be reintroduced on fuels that's tied to the level of carbon in the fuel as it's combusted.
So you wouldn't be supportive of the overall tax levy on fuels being reduced? You wouldn't be supportive of tax levies on fuels being reduced, thereby making fuel cheaper?
We feel that the tax ought to be designed with the environmental protection in mind. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Turner, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. My question is for our friends at the CGA. And I noticed in the brief that you mentioned Budget 2007 that there was a golden opportunity to further reduce personal taxes. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate what opportunity was actually missed.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, there were no reductions made for the higher income earning Canadians, those perhaps over 100,000 up to 200,000 and so on. There is a serious problem in the country of losing these skilled workers to other countries simply because we don't have competitive tax rates at that level. At that level, our tax rates are higher than many other countries in the G7 and in the group of developed countries with which we compete. We think that that was the main area where we might have missed the boat.
All right. In the subsequent economic statement that was recently tabled, the minister brought the GST down by another point. What's your comment on that? He didn't touch basic income tax. Well, he did took the income tax rate back downward to where it was 2 years ago, but he didn't make any absolute cuts on that. But he cut the GST. Does that accomplish what you want, or are we still missing the boat?
What we want is for an expert panel to review all of these issues. I will admit that our Tax and Fiscal Policy Committee discussed the issues of a drop in GST versus a drop in income taxes, and we couldn't reach a consensus. I think that probably reflects the country as a whole. We're suggesting an expert panel on taxation simply because we need the input from all sectors of our economy to consider these issues and to see which is most beneficial.
Now, the government has rejigged the tax code in its budget of 2006 and 2007. It's brought in additional tax credits. Some experts believe that it has complicated the tax code, actually made compliance more difficult. Because of these small tax credits. Do you have an opinion on that?
I certainly do. Well, and I'm glad I'm sitting next to Dr. Smith in case my dentures fall out during my answer here. But there's no doubt that these various different adjustments and tax credits and rate differentials depending on the date of purchase of certain assets, all of these things designed at one point in time for perhaps to encourage a certain sector of the economy or to close a loophole have added tremendous complexity to the Act. It's a very frustrating thing for us to not know if there is some obscure provision that was introduced to one of the 5,000 pages of tax legislation that we have to deal with that may put the particular transaction we're dealing with, even though it's a simple one, offside. It's very, very hard to know whether that's going to happen.
So the tax code has actually been made more complicated by the last two budgets?
Absolutely.
All right, and that's not a good thing.
That is not a good thing from the perspective, nor from the perspective of the average taxpayer across this country.
All right, and what are some of the implications of that? Is this hurting productivity or competitiveness? Are there economic consequences?
There are certainly economic consequences. Whenever you have a very, very complicated income tax system, you encourage, first of all, non-compliance. And that could be intentional non-compliance, which of course is the underground economy. We're likely losing millions and millions of dollars a year in tax revenues because of that underground economy, partially because the system is so complicated. In addition, there is a huge frustration for taxpayers that are hit with reassessments from unintentional non-compliance. And that occurs frequently also. So there is definitely a cost to our economy.
All right, thank you very much. So increasing non-compliance, costing millions of dollars, frustrating taxpayers. I'm just trying to summarize.
No,
that was so good.
Time is gone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wallace. 5 minutes.
Chairman, and I'll be brief. I have a question for Dr. Smith on the dental piece. Some of your colleagues came to see me yesterday to talk about the opportunity for a deferral. I don't like the wording of it, the PWIF, but a deferral program. And there was a little bit of confusion whether, does your organization expect that the individual who are paying into it would never pay tax on that money, or would it be like a regular RRSP where once you take it out, then you pay tax on that, assuming that you're a lower tax bracket?
There's basically two formats that you could use. One is, of course, the format of the registered educational savings plan, where it's, taxable dollars that go into the plan and then come out to your children later on at a reduced rate. Or, of course, the RRSPs, which is, upfront saving versus down the road when you have reduced income. So there's several formats that it could be placed into, and it would be structuring one that recognized government's responsibility in long-term planning as well.
You did mention in your delegation here today about a government top-up, which I hadn't heard about yesterday. Are you expecting the Government of Canada to add cash to these funds?
I guess that's a possibility, but that's one possibility. Protecting the interest, though, that would be earned within the plan would be one way that the government was foregoing taxes on that money during the time that it was within the plan. So that, in a sense, would be a potential top-up.
Guaranteeing the interest that would be paid, is that?
That's, well, not guaranteeing the interest, but the interest would be protected while it was in the plan and not taxable.
Taxable, okay. My second question is for Ms. Morris, right, from University? Yeah, and keep a job open for my friend over there in case he loses this one. The question for you, that what always is, since I've gotten here, I've been thinking about is, what do you do in terms of attracting, when you make an offer to an international student to come here to do grad work, on occasion, they don't get a visa to come here. Like, what pre-qualifications, other than educate, like, is there any work done by the universities to make sure that that individual can actually come here? Like, what's the process, or is it strictly based on their undergraduate work somewhere else?
Thank you. That's a really good question. One of our challenges has been that when we talk about attracting the best and the brightest international students, we've always argued that three things have to work together simultaneously. One, there has to be a good understanding of what it is that Canadian universities have to offer, so some branding and some promotion, and we recognize the money that was invested last year in beginning some work on that branding and promotion of Canadian universities. That there's a scholarship program there for students, international students, again, the best and the brightest, because other countries are doing the same. And thirdly, that our immigration policies support bringing those students here. And obviously the universities, when they're admitting students for graduate work, are looking primarily at their academic work and their academic standing and their ability to take on that program. What's very frustrating is when the immigration policies work at counter purposes, if you will. We have instances where students who aren't prepared to confirm that they plan to return to their home country, that can be cited as a cause for refusing their entry, or can't bring their spouses. And so it's just important to have it work
I just
together.
want to follow up on that comment. If we change the immigration policy that, like, if we educate somebody with a master's degree or a PhD here and they decide not to go back to their country and they want to spend their career in Canada, I don't see that as a problem. But from an immigration perspective, sometimes we do. Does your organization have a position on that? What we should do in that case? Have you taken a position that if somebody comes here for an education and they wish to stay, that we make an effort to make that happen? Is your organization taking any position to that effect?
Yes, we've always argued that in fact, if the student, an international student, chooses to stay in Canada, then that is a benefit to Canada. But if they choose to return home, they take with them all of those Canadian connections that they made while they're here, and that's equally an advantage to Canada. So we're very, very aware of the sensitivities around developing countries sending their best and their brightest and not having them go back home to contribute. And at the moment, it sort of breaks down one-third, you know, those who stay in the country and make their career here, those who go home, and those who, in fact, go elsewhere. But they're a very important pool of talent for our country, and the competition is remarkable around the world.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the witnesses for coming and the questions. It was very entertaining and informative. And for that, we will pause now for 5 minutes as we bring our next panelist forward. Please. We'll call the meeting back to order. We have most of our witnesses taking their seats, and members are making their way back. We will start. First of all, this round of panelists with the Association of Fundraising Professionals. Susan Mullen, Vice President of Development. The floor is yours. 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you very much. Good evening. On behalf of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, or AFP, I wanted to thank the Standing Committee on Finance for allowing us to speak today during the pre-budget consultations and to follow up our submission of August 15th. We wanted to thank the committee as well for its support of the elimination of capital gains tax on gifts of securities to charity and for extending that charitable giving incentive to private foundations in the 2008 budget. We're grateful for that leadership. Just to give you some quick background, AFP is the largest community of fundraisers in the world, representing more than 29,000 individuals internationally and nearly 3,000 across Canada with a network of 16 active chapters. Our sector represents education, healthcare, training, social services, everything that really strengthens our society and creates a favorable environment for business, in fact. The nonprofit sector comprises more than 160,000 organizations, of which approximately 80,000 are registered charities, with more than $100 billion in annual revenue. These organizations are devoted to strengthening the factors such as workforce infrastructure, cultural initiatives on which our country's economic future is based and which make our communities healthy and vibrant for all. Proposals that increase the capacity of charities to provide these programs are critical, and gifts of stock to charity are now completely exempt from the capital gains tax, but stock is just one of the two most common ways Canadians have and accumulate wealth. The other is land and real estate. And I should say that I'm here both with my volunteer hat on, which is as chair of the Association of Fundraising Professionals Canadian Government Relations Committee, but it's from my day job as Vice President Development at York University Foundation in Toronto that I can speak from personal experience. The impact of the change on capital gains tax for securities has been significant. We have seen more than a doubling in a year of our gifts of securities to York University, and many other organizations are seeing the same growth, not only in number, but across all levels, from $2,000 up to $2 million, quite literally, in a year. We also have donors, though, asking about gifts of land and wanting to explore that opportunity. In some cases, it's related to research that could take place at York, and therefore it would be land that York would hold on to. But in other cases, it's simply where donors wish to consider a gift from assets rather than income. So the very same kind of principles and incentives involved in gifts of securities apply to gifts of land and real estate. And unfortunately, the same kinds of barriers and obstacles that used to apply to gifts of securities still apply to gifts of land and real estate. Given the evidence from our experience with gifts of securities, AFP does not believe that any sort of trial period is needed for eliminating the capital gains tax on gifts of land and real estate to charitable organization. The Ecological Gifts Program, under which gifts of ecologically sensitive land are donated to the government or a charity and exempt from capital gains tax, provides a model that can be expanded to any sort of land given to any type of charity, subject, of course, to proper valuation. And really, that is our key recommendation, and we welcome comments and questions.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to the Canadian Association of Income Funds. Margaret Lefebvre, Executive Director. You have 5 minutes. Go ahead, Margaret.
Thank you very much. The Canadian Association of Income Funds has been before this committee on several occasions in the last year, and we're glad to be here again regarding the income trust policy announced in October 31st, 2006. Bill C-52, the first budget 2000 2007 implementation bill, which contained the income trust legislation, did not, in fact, address significant implementation issues that require immediate attention. It is to address these issues that we appear before you today. The committee, however, should also be aware that the damaging consequences of the government's actions continue. Since October 31, 2006, there have been more than 42 transactions that involve the selling, merging, or acquisition of income trusts with an enterprise value in excess of $31 billion. The majority of these transactions by dollar value involve foreign buyers of Canadian assets. Most have gone into the hands of private equity and pension funds. Virtually all of these entities will pay little or no tax to either the federal or provincial governments. In addition, ordinary Canadians are frozen out of participating in the potential investment benefits not only of our own natural resources, but also of a diverse and entrepreneurial business trust sector. Many small and medium-sized Canadian businesses have had their access to capital severely impaired. This makes them vulnerable to takeover and leaves them powerless to compete. Mr. Chairman, at the best, the estimates of tax leakage at the time that this bill was put forward was $500 million from the federal level, potentially $300 million from the provincial level. Together, that makes $800 million. In 2006, the total trust distributions from the sector were $16 billion. To recover totally would have required a tax rate of no more than 5%. Instead, we are faced with 31.5%. Let me now turn to our technical recommendations. The following sets out some of the issues and deficiencies, although this list is not intended to be exhaustive. No certainty or legal clarity has been given in the legislation for the transition period in the guidelines issued December 15th. This clarity is urgently needed in some form, whether through the release of further policy guidance or another mechanism available to the government. For example, under the existing guidelines, it is not clear that issuing equity to replace debt, whether convertible or not, that was outstanding as of October 31, 2006, will be considered growth for the purposes of the guidelines, and whether equity issued to replace outstanding lower-tier debt is excluded from the growth in equity capital. In many circumstances, trusts have borrowings in lower-tier entities in which the trust has a direct or indirect interest, and such debt should be considered and regarded in the same as replacement of the debt of the trust. Also, no legislative framework was included in the legislation to facilitate conversion back to corporate status on a tax-deferred basis similar to other tax-deferred rollover rules as they already appear in the Tax Act. By opposing a high level of statutory corporate tax rate on trusts, and especially on the distributions, the government has clearly signaled the elimination of the trust sector. There was no legislated mechanism in the bill to eliminate the remaining trust vehicle after conversion to a corporation in a tax-efficient manner. Such rules are necessary to remove uncertainty and provide an orderly transition. Furthermore, the trust rules have such breadth of application as to bring within their ambit non-publicly traded units under certain circumstances, which surely could not have been the intent. This matter has been brought to the attention of the Department of Finance by this association, by a host of income trusts, and by the Joint Committee of the CICA and the Canadian Bar. We urge this committee to move quickly on recommendations to rectify these issues so that businesses can make informed decisions during the transition period. We welcome, however, the direction of the reduction of the corporate tax rate in the economic statement, and within this paradigm are anxious to sit down with the government and find an appropriate resolution to the damaging consequences outlined today within the government's stated corporate tax policy, and CAPE is ready to sit down with the Finance Department as soon as possible. Thank you
very much. Now we move on to the Canadian Booksellers Association. Chris Talbot, manager of Queen's University Bookstore. The floor is yours, 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Tabor, and I'm here as a representative of the Canadian Booksellers Association, the CBA. I'm also the director of the Queen's University Campus Bookstore and an active member and spokesperson for Campus Stores Canada, representing over 100 campus stores in the country. Thank you, members of the Finance Committee, for giving me a chance to speak today. The CBA is a national trade association representing close to 1,000 booksellers from coast to coast. CBA active members include trade, campus, chain, specialty, used, and antiquarian booksellers. The CBA booksellers are located in all provinces and territories in all communities, large and small, from Victoria to St. John's, Iqaluit to Halifax. The CBA, along with a long list of like-minded organizations in Canada, strongly believes that the goods and services tax should be removed from books. By eliminating the GST on books, Canadians, including students, will be able to purchase books more often, thus contributing to an improved literacy rate, which can only result in a more informed, innovative, and productive workforce. In the wake of the strong Canadian dollar, Canadian booksellers have especially been hit hard as consumers were able to compare the U.S. sticker price to the Canadian sticker price on books. Over the past few months, booksellers have been working hard to pressure publishers to lower their prices. Consumers must understand that prices are set by publishers, not retailers, and at least 6 months before the titles arrive in a store. Therefore, due to the rapid movement in exchange rates, current prices rarely reflect current rates. The CBA has also been working with the government to find a way to solve the issue. I'd like to now shift gears and hit the subject of book prices in Canada with the rising Canadian dollar from a campus store perspective. In taking off my CBA hat for a moment, I'll move to the campus store's position on some regulatory changes we see as required. As I mentioned earlier, our industry has been assailed in the media for an inexplicable difference between the price of a book in America and that same book in Canada, and I'm sure many of you have had similar questions raised in your writings. What most people don't know is that 10% to 15% of book prices is a regulated royalty paid to multinational distributors. A typical textbook, which can cost $100, could cost $10 to $15 less if the government were to eliminate a regulatory protection that does nothing for authors or customers. We could see book prices drop by 10 or 15% overnight, and I'll explain how. The Copyright Act is, as you know, a broad statute that governs the protection and distribution of intellectual property. In the cases of printed material, the Act allows for publishers to establish import monopolies on the works of artists from around the world. Minister Flaherty has recently used the example of Harry Potter books authored by J.K. Rowling, noting that these books have different costs in America. Let me explain a very significant element in that cost differential and how booksellers, campus stores, students, and customers are beholden to foreign-owned publishers, also known in the Act as exclusive distributors. Section 27.1 of the Act makes it an offense to import new books from any source other than the exclusive distributor of those books, provided that those distributors adhere to the regulations promulgated under the Act. These regulations stipulate that an importer can charge a bookseller the price of the book in the country of origin, the U.S. or the U.K., the difference in the exchange rates between the two countries, and either a 10% or a 15% levy, depending on the country of origin. That means that non-Canadian publishers can tack on an additional 10 or 15% of pure profit to their products before they risk losing a sale to parallel importation. Mr. Chair, that pure profit comes directly out of the pockets of Canadian students with no appreciable benefit to them or accruing to the artists or authors who created the work in question. The regulation was promulgated in 1999. As you can imagine, the world of cross-border shipping and shopping has changed significantly since then. Ironically, since the advent of the Internet, Canadian customers can get some books cheaper abroad than a Canadian reseller can. Section 27.1 protections are outdated in a universe with a parity dollar. The tariff protections actually exacerbate the direct pocketbook impact that the levy has on individual booksellers and purchasers. Eliminating the levy will not affect the primary function of the Copyright Act to provide creators with the ability to protect their art and earn a royalty from producing it. Further, nothing in our proposal would impinge on a publisher's exclusive right to distribute in Canada, provided they do not charge more for the work in question than they would at home. We ask, why should Canadian students pay more than their peers in the UK and the United States for the identical book? We thank you for your time and attention.
Okay, and thank you very much. Now we move on to the President of the Canadian Construction Association. We have Michael Atkinson, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We certainly welcome the opportunity to present our views and recommendations. As mentioned, I am the President of the Canadian Construction Association, which is the national voice of the non-residential construction industry. We represent some 20,000 firms from coast to coast to coast in Canada who build everything except single-family dwellings. Mr. Chairman, you have our written submission of last August, which outlines the specific measures we are recommending in response to the then committee's questions relative to the appropriate criteria to be used in considering changes to taxes, fees, and other charges. Given the time constraints, I do not propose to mention all those specific recommendations in that submission, but would like to draw the committee's attention to 3 main areas where we believe further action is required. First one is with respect to infrastructure investment. Now, a lot has been said in recent weeks about the size of our public infrastructure deficit, particularly in the municipal area. There's no doubt that to address this and other critical areas of Canada's strategic infrastructure, it is very important to our nation's future economic and social well-being that it's going to take a concerted effort at all levels of government. We've been pleased with the efforts of the current federal government, building upon the initiative shown by the previous Liberal government when it agreed to make available a portion of the federal excise tax on gasoline for municipal infrastructure reinvestment purposes. For the first time in Canada, we had the makings of a certain and long-term federal commitment to infrastructure. That program, however, currently runs to 2013-14 only. It needs to be made permanent. We also acknowledge the establishment of the new Building Canada Fund announced in the last federal budget. We would encourage the federal government here to conclude the necessary agreements with provincial and territorial governments as soon as possible, and in doing so, to show some flexibility and understanding for the varying priorities and needs in the different provincial and territorial jurisdictions. With respect to the EI fund, the EI rate setting mechanism is still very broken and needs to be fixed. Despite the introduction of the new EI rate setting mechanism that was supposed to ensure that EI rates would be set on a break-even basis, the EI fund continues to generate billions of dollars in annual surpluses that are then diverted to the General Revenue Fund because of the inability of the Chief Actuary and the EI Commission to take into account the actual performance of that fund when they set future rates. EI continues to pick the pockets of Canadian employers and workers in order to feather the federal fiscal nest. If more aggressive rate reductions are not in the cards, look at some of the other specific recommendations, including the introduction of a yearly basic exemption similar to the Canada Pension Plan, which previous versions of this committee have in fact recommended. The throne speech did make a commitment to review the governance and management of the EI Fund. Now is an opportune time for this committee to make substantive recommendations and get the EI Fund back where it's supposed to be. The third and last area I want to talk briefly about is the taxation of employer-provided vehicles. Many employees in the construction industry are required, as a condition of their employment, to take employer-provided vehicles, primarily pickups and vans, home at night for security reasons, and are expressly forbidden to use these vehicles for personal or family purposes. These vehicles are usually filled with specialized equipment used in the employee's work. These individuals will then proceed directly to a construction work site, which is often further than the employer's principal place of business. Gone are the days when employees first report to the employer's principal place of business to pick up a company vehicle. Gone are the days when employers kept their company trucks and vans in a common yard at their company's offices. In fact, many of these employees never do, quote-unquote, go to the office. These company vehicles, in a sense, become their mobile office. There have been a number of recent decisions by the Tax Court of Canada that refute the government's position that there is a taxable personal benefit in such circumstances, but since these decisions have been rendered under the Court's informal procedures, they are not binding upon the Crown. The tax treatment of employer-provided vehicles in these circumstances needs to be reformed to reflect modern-day business practices and realities, and to recognize the total absence of a personal taxable benefit in such circumstances as described. There is a current review by the CRA on streamlining administrative practices with respect to the treatment of taxable employee benefits. Again, now is the opportune time to make a change in the Act, if necessary, to reflect current business practices. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much. Now we'll move on to the Canadian Council of International Cooperation. We have Jerry Barr, President, CEO. 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. My name is, as you've said, Jerry Barr, President CEO of the CCIC, the Canadian Council for International Cooperation, Canada's coalition to end global poverty. The Council is a membership-based organization with almost 100 non-governmental organizations working around the world and in Canada on international development cooperation and global issues. I want to thank the committee for the invitation. I know that you are thinking this year as you approach the budget about taxes and tax mechanisms. Millions of Canadians who pay taxes believe that Canada ought to continue with its foreign aid effort. And millions more believe that Canada is not yet contributing sufficiently to its share to help poor nations. I know that talk of tax cuts is in the air. I know that almost all who are elected and who watch politics full-time believe that as a whole, Canadians approve the idea of tax cuts. It is just an accepted truth. Well, here is another truth, perhaps a little counterintuitive. Canadians also approve the idea of tax increases to increase foreign aid spending. In a poll conducted by government in 2002, 57% of Canadians said they would be ready to pay 1% more of income tax, but those same Canadians also wanted to know that this money would be spent on directly improving the lives of those living in poverty. It's just one reason why Bill C-293, debated in the Canadian Senate today, is so important. It gives Canadians the assurances they want that Canada's aid dollars will be spent to reduce global poverty. C-293 sets out a three-part test. First, aid must reduce poverty. Second, it must be delivered in a way consistent with human rights standards. And finally, it should take account of the ideas and priorities of those supposed beneficiaries of aid who actually live the experience of poverty. That's the better part of the More and Better Aid proposal of the Make Poverty History campaign, supported today by hundreds of thousands of Canadians and organizations like CCIC. What about the more part of More and Better Aid? I think that's where the committee comes in. In previous reports to this committee has urged successive governments to set a plan to achieve the internationally accepted donor state target of 0.7% of gross national income dedicated to the assistance of poor countries. In 2006, the committee, your committee, proposed the government strike a plan to reach the target, which in its words should be developed no later than the 31st of December 2007. I note there's still time to do it, about a month from now. It's now more than 2 years since all parties unanimously supported the idea of achieving 0.7% by 2015, and on his way into office, the Prime Minister pledged his government would do better than previous governments growing Canada's aid spending. He said that his own target was to see Canadian aid spending equal to the average donor effort. Little enough, you might say, for a country whose economy is more robust than almost all of those who have already pledged to achieve or surpass the 0.7 mark by 2015. CCIC estimates that Canada could almost achieve average donor country effort by 2010, the Prime Minister's goal, with 15% increases to its official development assistance annually going forward. the same plan and approach would achieve 0.7 by 2017. And that's what we need. I'd like to ask the committee to suggest that the government set out a 10-year plan to achieve the 0.7 target. It's reasonable, it's affordable, and Canadians will support it. Mr. Chairman, I've provided the clerk with CCIC's pre-budget backgrounder, which together with some charted projections will provide a fuller explanation of the points that I've made here today.
And thank you very much. Now we'll move on to the Canadian Federation of Students. We have Amanda is national chairperson. The floor is yours, 5 minutes.
Thank you. Just want to thank the committee for this opportunity to present again on behalf of more than 500,000 university and college students at over 85 student unions across the country. I only have a few minutes today, so I'm going to focus my remarks on a few key areas: replacing the Millennium Scholarship Foundation with a system of need-based grants, increasing transfers to the provinces, and redirecting money currently being spent in areas that are of little assistance to those that need help the most. And of course, I'm very happy to take questions on anything that's in the brief after my presentation. Current enrollment data suggests that students from the highest income quintile are more than twice as likely to participate in post-secondary education than those from the lowest income quintile. When discussing participation rates between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Canadians, the gap is even more pronounced. Of those that are able to access post-secondary studies, students who have to borrow the most to participate and as a result carry more debt are twice as likely to drop out of their studies than students with little or no debt. The key policy question for the government then is how to close the gap in participation and create an equitable and high-quality system of post-secondary education. The Canadian Federation of Students has long advocated that post-secondary education be paid for through a progressive system of taxation rather than through upfront fees. Graduates of post-secondary earn more through their lifetime, thereby contributing more in taxes to pay for the cost of their education. The accessibility gap in Canada's universities and colleges is primarily driven by the cost of a post-secondary education. Over the past decade, tuition fees have more than doubled because universities and colleges scrambled to make up for the lost revenue from federal funding cuts. With the increase in core funding announced in the 2007 federal budget, the next logical step for the federal government is to institute federal legislation to guide the funding set aside for post-secondary education. In cooperation with the provinces, the Federation recommends that the federal government create a post-secondary education cash transfer payment for the purpose of reducing tuition fees and improving quality at universities and colleges. We believe the transfer should be guided by the principles set out in a Post-Secondary Education Act, obviously with specific a specific part of it with regards to Quebec and Quebec's ability to opt out. On the student financial assistance side at present, Canada has a confusing patchwork of student financial aid programs, many of which are probably too generously labeled aid. Student debt under the existing model of financial aid has ballooned to more than $12 billion in federal debt alone. Average student debt now ranges from $21,000 to $28,000, depending on the province of study. The main federal responses to the student debt crisis, tax credits, and the Millennium Scholarship Foundation have failed to improve access to post-secondary education or make a noteworthy dent in student debt for differing reasons. Hundreds of millions of dollars, of federal dollars, are spent each year on tax credits that are blind to financial need and are not available to students when most of their expenses are due. In addition to tax credits, the federal government spends millions on ineffective savings programs that are disproportionately being utilized by wealthier families, hardly the demographic they were created to assist. Although the Foundation is calling for its own renewal, there's very little evidence to suggest that the Foundation is the most effective delivery mechanism to improve access and reduce student debt. In fact, the Foundation is rife with accountability concerns, and its organizational culture confirms that it must not receive another cent of public funding. According to its own reports, the Millennium Scholarship Foundation's administrative costs have increased over 500% since its inception, and literally millions of dollars have been funneled to a foreign company run by 2 former employees of the Foundation. Just 2 months ago, we learned through access to information that the Foundation has also transferred close to $250,000 to an organization who vocally supports the Foundation's renewal. The management of the Foundation is out of control. Of course, students need non-repayable grants, and that's not the issue. The issue is how the Government of Canada administers grants, and the record is clear. The Foundation has failed in doing so, and we believe there is a better way. To avoid the accountability pitfalls of a private foundation, we recommend replacing the Millennium Scholarship Foundation with a new system of need-based grants administered through the Canada Student Loans Program, and phasing out the education, tuition fee, and textbook tax credits, as well as savings programs, and redirecting the money currently allocated to each of these programs into a new national system of need-based grants. We believe the timing for an ambitious reorientation of student financial aid could not be better. Not only is the Foundation's tenure coming to a close, but the federal government has the tools and opportunity to cut student debt by at least half if the political will exists. Finally, I just want to talk about the need to decrease the gap in participation between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Canadians. Funding for the Department of Indian and Northern Affairs post-secondary student support program has remained frozen at the same level since 1996, with an inadequate 2% annual increase. The Assembly of First Nations estimates that more than 13,000 eligible students in the last 6 years alone have been denied funding to participate in post-secondary studies. The Federation therefore recommends that the federal government immediately remove the funding cap on the post-secondary student support program and increase funding to and opportunities for all Aboriginal learners. In closing, I just want to thank the committee again for the opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Now our final panelist, Mark Yakubuski, President and CEO, Insurance Bureau of Canada. The floor is yours, 5 minutes.
Merci infiniment, Monsieur le Président. Je m'appelle Mark Yakubuski.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My name is Mark Yakubuski. I'm very pleased to appear once again before this committee. I'd like to highlight 3 points. Firstly, it is entirely appropriate for me to pay tribute to the measures that were unveiled by the Minister of Finance concerning corporate taxes as well as individual taxes.
By the Minister of Finance will tremendously improve Canada's productive and competitive position around the world. I certainly want to take the time to applaud those changes. There's still more work to be done. This is a never-ending game. As a result of the changes announced by the Minister of Finance, Canada moved from the second worst record with respect to capital taxation in the OECD to the 11th best place, worst place in the OECD. So a lot of other countries are moving in this direction, and we've got to make sure that we keep up with them, but the measures announced by the Minister of Finance are very important. The second thing I'd like to say is that the single most important tax measure that the government could take to improve productivity in this country is to convince those provinces that have not done so already to harmonize their provincial sales taxes. No other measure would add more to the productive capacity of this country. Now, I have the pleasure of dealing with lots of provincial governments every day, and I believe very firmly that with an innovative combination of the carrot and the stick, that we can convince those provinces that have not done so to harmonize their sales taxes. It would be a tremendous competitive boost for Canada. The last thing I want to say is that we have a tremendous infrastructure deficit and a tremendous infrastructure challenge in Canada. The $33 billion allocated in the last 2 budgets over a 7-year period by the government to renewed infrastructure in Canada is obviously a very considerable sum of money. However, I think we have to bear in mind that in 2005, for example, total world economic losses related to weather-related events cost $850 billion to the world's economy. Lord Levine, the head of Lloyd's of London, has arrived in Canada yesterday, and he's here in Ottawa today. Will remind all of us that climate change is not something that we are looking forward to. Climate change is something that we are dealing with today. And in fact, the fact that we have to keep in mind is that even if we were to reduce the vehicle population of the planet by 50% tomorrow, or close every coal-fired plant around the world, or delay the development of the Alberta tar sands, there is still enough CO2 in the environment to motor the forces of climate change for at least the next 50 years, according to the International Panel on Climate Change. What does that mean? It means, I think this is the real challenge. Let's make Canada the country that most successfully adapts to climate change. And let's do that by taking hold of this infrastructure challenge, by encouraging our municipalities and our provincial governments to, of course, invest vigorously themselves, by encouraging public-private partnerships at every opportunity. And I believe, quite frankly, that the federal government should, in fact, tie much of its infrastructure spending allocations to the provinces to some component that relates directly to measures that help Canada adapt to climate change. That means rebuilding our water and sewage system in a very big way. C'est un grand défi, c'est tout à fait réalisable. La volonté, c'est ce qu'il faut. Merci beaucoup.
It's a huge challenge, but all we need is willpower.
Thank you very much. We will now move to the question and answer part of our meeting. We'll start with Mr. McCallum. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you to all the panelists. And my first question is to Amanda Aziz, and it's a question about Bill 284, which I think your organization supports. And as you, I'm sure, know, this bill would extend access grants for low-income Canadians from 1 year to 4 years. And I think on the topic of this bill, you said, and I quote, "The measures in Bill C-284 in fact, are long overdue, and there's plenty of research out there that concludes that upfront financial assistance is the most effective aid measure to improve access to post-secondary education." So my question is simply whether you were disappointed that this bill didn't pass when in the House on Wednesday, last Wednesday.
Thanks for the question. We certainly did support what Bill C-284 was trying to do, and that's provide more needs-based or more assistance for low-income Canadians and for low-income families. Of course, we understand that there was some concern with regards to Quebec students also receiving funding, but I think from our perspective, we are very much in support of measures that are going to increase assistance for both low-income Canadians, but also assistance that's needs-based. And so that's part of what we're proposing here today in terms of the replacement of the foundation. So something with a comprehensive program. It's going to affect both needs or assist both on a need base, but also on an income base.
Right. So that bill seems to respond to your priorities. So I guess you're disappointed that it didn't get through?
We think that there needs to be more measures that the government is pursuing. So, you know, I think in the context of the expiring Millennium Scholarship Foundation, in the context of this bill, I do think that we are in support of what the bill was trying to do. We do think that measures obviously the bill could have been broadened. But
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Atkinson, I certainly think you make a good point when you suggest this government is feathering its nest by overcharging companies and workers on EI, particularly when they're just drowning in money. So can you say in concrete terms how we could end this feathering of the nest? What kind of legal changes would be required?
Well, I think I should point out first that this new EI rate setting mechanism was put in place by the Liberal government. So I think it's an apolitical feathering of the nest that's been going on for some time. But in all seriousness, it is very disturbing to my members, 90 to 95% of which are small business employers, to have what amounts to a payroll tax and then find out that the government is taking more than is required for the needs of the fund, knows it's taking more than is needed in the fund, and then ties the hands of the chief actuary and the EI Commission and absolutely forbids them to look backwards in setting future rates. In other words, you're not allowed to correct your past mistakes or miscalculations. Now, the throne speech did make a commitment to look at the governance and management of the EI fund, but with no specifics. And I think that opens the door for this committee to make some strong recommendations to change how the rates are set for that fund. I can guarantee you, if the EI fund was running an annual deficit, this would have been fixed a long time ago.
Well, thank you very much. I'll move on now to Madame Lefebvre. And we've had many discussions over the government's broken promise on income trusts, and but I think today, rather than debating the overall issue, you're here on more specific issues. So I guess I would find it rather unusual that so little has been done to manage the transition. You say there's no uncertainty or legal clarity on the transition period, no legislative framework to facilitate conversion back to corporate status. Aren't these yawning gaps in implementation? And I guess my question, if you wish to go there, goes to motive. I mean, my feeling is that the government's really out to destroy income trusts. Or if that's not the reason, how do you explain this yawning gap in the implementation process?
I think that the main way that I would explain it is that this was a piece of legislation that was rushed in, and the implementation was simply done on a very ad hoc basis. Specifically, most of the implementation measures, in fact, refer back to a press release that was issued on December 15th, and in that press release, there is a statement that this is a policy which was being announced by the government, which can be changed from time to time. And the enormous concern from the point of view of ongoing business within the framework of the policy as passed into law is the fact that it's extremely difficult to plan how you're going to implement when the implementation rules are not clear and when there is a statement on record that they could change it from time to time. We're looking for a statement from.
I mean, this is a law which states that this is the law, but they can change it from time to time as they see fit by regulation? Or?
In actual fact, that is not clear. So what we are looking for is a statement of intent, a statement that says this is what we, what we will recognize. This is the intention. That is how they dealt with the transition, for example, from a corporate entity, from an income trust to a corporate entity. They specifically said that the taxpayer, the unit holder, will not suffer tax consequences. There's not been a change in the law, but the statement was enough. We would look for a similar statement dealing for the issuers.
Well, thank you very much.
Very welcome.
Mr. Crett, 7 minutes.
Mr. Crett, you have 7 minutes. Mr. Barr, I want to applaud the work that your organization carries out. I think we need to make sure that we raise awareness throughout society, have people know about what goes on in other parts of the world. What do you think of the current situation, which is rather absurd? The Prime Minister traveled to Tanzania, and he said that we have been making increasing contributions, and the only reason why we cannot fulfill current government's commitment is because Canada's growth was much stronger than expected. Therefore, we're not respecting the commitment that we had originally made, which was to allocate a certain percentage of our GDP. So the richer we become, the lower our contribution is, and the less strong our fight against poverty is.
Affordability. If Canada does not now reinvest in aid spending when it is so eminently affordable, when on earth will it do so? I think this is, and it does go directly to the credibility not only of the Prime Minister but of the Government of Canada in 2000, and then the credibility of Canada itself. In the year 2000, world leaders used a really uniquely powerful phrase with respect to the Millennium Development Goals. The phrase they used was that they engaged between each other to spare no effort to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. And that is an unambiguously committed phrase. Since that time, new aid spending in Canada since 2000 is about $2 billion. Not more than 30% of that amount can be said to be identifiable as a contribution towards achieving the Millennium Development Goals. So we have, with respect to the money already committed, not anything close to sparing no effort. And we have, I think, and Canadians increasingly recognize this, nothing in the performance either of the previous government nor the current one that would give confidence to the idea that Canada is committed to grow its contribution to the 0.7 target. Though one finance committee after the other has pleaded with the government to do so, and members of all parties have voted for those resolutions.
Oui, ça veut dire qu'il faudrait finir de faire notre travail raisonnablement, que le gouvernement.
That means we need to do our job properly, make sure that the government sticks to a 10-year plan. Today, an international report says that climate change is going to become, in the short run, a factor that will exacerbate global poverty. Now, if we do fulfill our commitment of 0.7%, now I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that, but will that be offset by the fact that we haven't taken the measures necessary in order to mitigate the negative effects of climate change?
The climate change is going to have immense impact, and especially on the world's poorest, almost no matter what. The real question is how effectively does the world community marshal resources to help particularly poor economies address this. Now, the principle of Kyoto is that those most responsible act first, and that unhappily has not yet happened. The world's poorest countries will take the sharpest impact of climate change. But at a moment when aid resources are going to be plainly so imperative, so essential, it really falls to us to make sure that our resources are used in the most effective way. And you know, the way in which Canadian aid spending now is undertaken diminishes the dollars we send abroad, so that resources which are tied to Canadian sourcing, resources which never really see the inside of a developing country economy, that is, money spent for legitimate purposes, certainly, but not to reduce global poverty, the support of students in Canada, the settlement of refugee costs. All these things have to be done, but Canada is harboring these costs in its aid budget. The result is that, on our estimation, that about 70 cents of every Canadian aid dollar actually makes it to the developing world. And we need to change that sort of thing as well. That's part of what Bill C-293 is about.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Barr. Monsieur Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Kesteven. You talked about employment insurance. Do you agree that we need to have an entirely independent fund? That would mean contributions made would go into the employment insurance fund, and there would be an independent committee made up of employers and workers, and that way the government would not have money to draw from that could be used to pay down Canada's deficit.
Suggestions that's been made, but I think we would have to see the details and know exactly what the mix of representation on that governance board would be. There are a number of other concerns with the EI fund that are somewhat beyond the control of employers and employees, and so governments, plural, are an important stakeholder there. We certainly wouldn't want to see the EI fund transformed into something that it wasn't intended to be. That is, I think, both employees and employers are one voice on that. We've had a number of situations in which there's been, from the employer's side, an unwillingness on the part of the government to deal with substantive reports to the EI because it's no longer a contributor. Historically, the federal government used to be a contributor of 20% of the fund. Now it is not unless it goes into a deficit situation. when the government was an active contributor, it seemed to have it was easier to get its eye with respect to standard reforms. I'll give you one example. It's in the report. Very quickly, employer overcontributions are not refundable, and employee overcontributions are. And the answer we get from the Department of Finance and HRSDC as to why overpayments by employers are not refundable, the answer is, oh, that'd be too hard to keep track of.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll now go to Mr. Menzies. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our presenters today, some of whom I've met at different functions and some of whom I've met at different committees. Let's start with Mr. Atkinson, and we share, I think, your frustrations with EI. The present minister is struggling with trying to make some changes to that, and we certainly appreciate your support. I think we all recognize that we were handed a can of worms, if you will. When we opened it up, it was crawling all over, and we're certainly trying to work with industry to make sure that it does, in fact, reflect the concerns that you have raised. I guess I just want to get your thoughts. This government has put forward a $33 billion infrastructure package for Canada, the largest infrastructure announcement basically in history. And we're promoting the use of it through P3s to actually triple it by involving private-public partnerships. What advice might you give us on that? We think that we can leverage this to $100 billion, which is an incredible amount of money. The criticisms that we received last week from the municipalities were saying 127. Well, the 100 puts us awfully close to their rather grandiose ask, but certainly closer than we've been for a lot of years. Can you help us with how would your association be involved in that?
Well, first of all, I think it's fair to say that public-private partnerships are just one tool in the toolbox. They aren't a panacea. They aren't necessarily the best way to go in meeting all of Canada's infrastructure needs. As I'm sure you all are aware, in order to go to a true public-private partnership situation, you have to guarantee a certain flow of revenue for the private sector investors. That's pretty hard to do for certain aspects of Canada's infrastructure in certain regions, particular underpopulated regions of the country. So my best advice there is to not look to one particular approach as being the panacea or as being the tool or solution in all circumstances. Certainly P3s have their place, and they can, as you mentioned, leverage additional investment. However, what's more important is having a long-term plan. We in this country have never had a long-term plan for something as important as our national highway system. Never had a plan. It's very difficult for the construction industry, as arguably one of Canada's largest employers with over 1 million people, to do any effective planning with our public sector clients, government's plural, when we don't know sometimes 6 months out where the priorities are going to be. And with respect to working in partnership with lower levels of government, municipalities and provinces, that's even more important. I know that this government is trying to make an attempt to make funding more certain going out by extending the excise fuel tax commitment out to 2013 and 14. That is so important. It's very difficult for municipal governments, provincial governments to make long-term planning with respect to infrastructure investment without knowing whether or not the federal government or another level of government is going to be there as a player. And that's even more so important in the private sector. If you're looking to attract private sector investment, the more governments, plural, can get their long-term planning and priorities in place for infrastructure renewal and reinvestment, the more you'll attract the private sector community.
Good, thank you. And point taken with it's not a panacea, but it is a way to leverage government dollars, tax dollars, to the best advantage. And I was in Chile not too long ago. Most of their roads are P3s, and shouldn't say this, pretty good roads. They're incredibly good roads down there. And so, good example that we can use. I've got a question for the Insurance Bureau, Mr. Yakubuski, if I'm saying Yakubuski. Thank you. Your comment about improving productivity and reference to harmonizing taxes. We're hearing quite consistently from industry representatives, different associations about the need to do this. Unfortunately, we're not hearing that from some of the provinces that haven't harmonized. I might suggest that we could enlist your help in perhaps talking to your provinces that your association represents.
And I can assure you, you will have our help, and you have had our help, because I never miss an opportunity to remind the Minister of Finance in Ontario and elsewhere that if he really wants to add to the productivity of his province or elsewhere, he needs to harmonize the provincial sales tax. I mean, the fact of the matter is the provincial sales tax basically is an invitation for Canada to underinvest in capital goods. And if you want to know what the single biggest source of our productivity gap is with the United States, it's our system of sales taxation. So we will certainly do everything we can, Mr. Menzies, to get that message across.
Okay, thank you. Jerry Barr, I think, would have hurt feelings if I didn't address C-293, and in fact, you did bring that up. And I think that you've probably heard all of my concerns about that bill. I think the example that our Prime Minister gave us by his Canada-led Save a Million Children in Africa this week, I think that's a pretty good indication that we're solidly on track to doubling our aid to Africa, reminding everyone, as you have said, that it's as much about aid effectiveness as it is about the actual dollars. And we've committed to getting to the OECD average by 2015, I believe, in line with the Millennium Development Goals.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay. That's just a point you were making, right? Okay. Thank you very much. 7 minutes, Monsieur McCarr.
Monsieur. Un petit problème de micro.
Some technical problems? Firstly, I want to apologize for today's events. I had some interviews to give, and so I missed a few of your presentations, but I did get a chance to go over the written submissions, and I wish to thank all of our witnesses for indicating some of their plans. I was able to catch Mr. Barr's presentation. I think we have to understand that for a country as wealthy as Canada, we need to contribute our fair share. And yes, I think your statement does deserve particular attention from the government as well as from all members of this committee. Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask my first question to Margaret Lefebvre. She's raised a subject that is of the utmost concern for many investors. It's a rather complex subject. The NDP has never been in favor of income trust funds. However, we have never lied, neither. We have never lied about investing in income trust funds. The current government said that it's going to stay the cap. Now, Ms. Lefebvre, what I heard of your presentation, she said very clearly that people were misled, that they were lied to by the Conservative government. Madame Lefebvre, I don't want to involve you in the inner workings of this committee, but next week I want to inform you that we have set aside an exceptional meeting with the person who was designated by the current government to replace the governor of the Bank of Canada, Mr. David Dodge. His name is Mark Carney. He played an essential role in this entire issue of income trust funds. My question to you is the following. In light of the experience that we've gone through since last year's Halloween treat given by Mr. Flaherty, because you see, it has been reasoned that there has been some losses. And given what has occurred since last year, do you think that the government's forecasts have come to light, or now that those income trust funds have gone to the U.S., we are getting fewer revenue, lesser revenue in taxes?
The original stated intent that the reason that they moved as quickly as they did and as suddenly as they did, the official intent at the time was given as tax leakage. The tax leakage that was estimated at that time was $500 million at the federal level and a potential $300 million at the provincial level. We contested those numbers, and in actual fact, we were able to prove that those numbers were much significantly lower than that. But even if one took that to be as the case, very shortly after that, as the income trust started to fall one after the other, and it became very clear that there would be no tax payment because the income trusts were being repatriated either into private equity or, more importantly, into foreign, and foreign as in non-national equity. It was very clear that it was that the whole argument towards tax leakage was dropped in favor of one towards tax fairness. Now, the tax fairness argument was one that was based on the premise that corporations and income trusts basically should be taxed at the same level. And even on that level, we have a severe problem, because the effective corporate tax rate on corporations runs roughly between 6, 5, maybe up to 10% maximum. The 31.5% tax rate, potentially reduced to 29.5%, is still absolutely crippling and effectively guarantees that the instrument cannot survive. And whereas we understand that the government had a concern, but the severity and I think the lack of consultation in finding the solution is one that will in fact damage the economy far more than was expected. And we were here on numerous occasions talking about the unintended negative consequences. So now, within the context of the law as it is passed, we are still prepared to sit down and see if we can find ways to mitigate and ameliorate the damage that has been done, and see if we can find a way through this.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chair, in light of that answer, I just want to extend the following invitation. Now, in the past, we received a lot of information from investors who spoke out on income trust funds. This is the first time that I have heard a presentation from her association. I'd like to see some statistics that support her position, because nothing would make me happier than using those figures next week when we have the opportunity to exchange with Mr. Carney. We judge something based on its results. And so we are relying on Mr. Carney's forecast of the economy for the next 10 years. So I'd like to ask him how he came to such predictions. And as you said so eloquently, we are losing much more than we expected.
By HLB Decision Economics, an independent outside consultant who did the studies on the tax leakage estimates at the time. I'd be more than happy to provide them to you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to Mr. Turner. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tabor, you referenced the Minister of Finance and Harry Potter. Was that famous press conference the Minister of Finance gave, holding up Harry Potter, was that helpful to the industry?
Not particularly.
Why?
It avoided exposing some of the real causes of the differential in the pricing, that they can get lost between retailers. But there's a structural problem that was missed, and that is the imposition of a tariff, if you will, on the importation of books from the U.S. and Canada.
Do you believe that the minister raised consumer expectations, that prices in the book publishing industry should fall? Was he almost making a demand as the Minister of Finance?
I think the minister was trying to encourage, perhaps misunderstood some of the mechanics of our industry, that there is a lag between currency conversions.
What do you think he was trying to do? Why did he have the press conference, though? I mean, maybe he didn't understand the industry, but he must have had a reason for having the media conference. What do you think that was?
Well, I think he was looking for an explanation for the differential in prices, retail prices between Canadian products and the same products, rather, in Canada and the U.S.
But that's not why he had the press conference. He didn't have the press conference to look for the reasons. I'm just trying to.
I mean, I don't mind any question being asked, but as long as they have the ability to answer, and that's a very subjective one. So, give them a more direct question.
Mr. Chairman, you got nothing to say about it. I'm sorry, but this is my 5 minutes. You have you don't have anything to say about how I asked my questions.
Sorry, I just did, and you just continue, please.
I don't know. That did not come out of my time, by the way. Mr. Yakubuski. In terms of climate change, you talked about the need for us to be ready for climate change, almost like it was an inevitability. Do you feel that Canada is doing nothing then that will stem the inevitable change in climate? And do you have a comment on the Prime Minister's position in Uganda this past weekend?
Well, I have said in the past that there is no such thing as a serious climate change policy that does not have a plan to adapt to climate change. And I think the reality is that most countries have missed the ball game so far. Most jurisdictions have missed the ball game. I want to make sure that Canada doesn't. And I think that the real challenge is to recognize that, yes, climate change and severe weather that come with it are inevitable. And we want to be the country that best adapts to this.
Have we done anything, though, to prepare? Are we taking a leadership role in this particular file, or are we not?
Well, I'm suggesting ways that we can take a leadership role.
Are we? But are we? In your
there's a lot of work to be done. I think that's clear.
All right. Ms. Lefebvre, your testimony certainly is damning. The consequences that have happened since the end of October of last year with income trusts. Do you believe the Minister of Finance knew what the consequences would be, or do you think that these were unintended consequences he didn't foresee?
We have maintained from the very beginning that these were unintended consequences. I believe that the minister acted, I'm sure, what he considered to be good faith, to a problem that was obvious at the time, and probably out of a sense of some degree of panic about the possible conversion on a mass scale of too many private corporations. However, the difference between reacting to that particular situation and the draconian measure that was taken is one that has effectively caused the destruction of the income trust. I don't believe that he realized at the time that that would be the consequence.
Well, it appears now, a year and a bit later, that what he was afraid of has been far surpassed by the actual negative consequences of the action that was taken. Have you had any further dealings with the Department of Finance or with the Minister? Has anyone called you up and said, I'm sorry?
That's not a serious question. Sorry.
Well,
I'm sorry.
I wouldn't mind having it on the record.
That's true. It's not a serious question, but it is his last one. We'll now move on to Mr. Saint-Cyr.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Ms. Aziza. I'm always interested in issues that relate to universities. In fact, there are two major federal federations, student federations. You talk about a national needs-based scholarship program. During your statement, you looked at me and you said, yes, that would include a few readjustments for Quebec. Yet, when I go through your document, and it's a very extensive document, perhaps I'm mistaken, but I didn't find any reference in this document to Quebec's traditional demands, that is an opt-out provision with full compensation in the case that a program is established. Now, perhaps this reflects your membership because there are only 2 universities from Quebec that are represented by your association and 1 college. Does your organization truly believe that Quebec, which is recognized as a nation, that Quebec does have the right to establish its own policies and programs, and if there is a national scholarship program that is based on needs, if such a program is established, do you agree that Quebec will have an opt-out option with full compensation?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We represent 4 student unions in Quebec and work very closely, like we talked about in the last years in committee, work very closely with La FUC, which is the Federation of University Students in Quebec. Our policy does dictate that we believe that Quebec right now, in the same way that Quebec right now does not participate in the Canada Student Loans Program, in the same way that other students in other provinces do, that there will need that the way the money is currently being allocated to Quebec students should continue. So right now, Quebec does a very good job actually of matching grants, upfront grants, with loans. And our policy and our membership supports the idea that this money would continue to flow through that way. So in fact, yes, recognizing the fact that Quebec right now has its own separate agreements with the federal program, and it's working very well for Quebec students. Our proposal actually is going farther than that and trying to look to Quebec as an example for the rest of the provinces as well. So to use that agreement that's in place in Quebec and encourage the federal government to move forward and create similar agreements with other provinces in that way.
Dans ce cas, ce serait intéressant que
In that case, it would be good that your comments are properly reflected in your written submission, because the way it's presented here, one has the impression that you are endorsing a national system that would apply to all provinces, including Quebec. When I look at your 4th recommendation, you go even further by talking about legislation on post-secondary education, similar to health legislation. The Bloc Québécois is vehemently opposed to that. And I think it's unanimous in Quebec. I think all student unions in Quebec would be opposed to that. So would you be willing to insert some sort of provision saying that such a system would not apply to Quebec? In fact, the NDP has introduced legislation about national daycare system, and yet it included a similar provision, which was the determining factor for us in order to support it. So would you agree to have some sort of provision that this would not apply to Quebec?
To the 2 major programs that we're putting forward are this national system of need-based grants to flow through the Canada Student Loans Program. Right now, the Canada Student Loans Program does have provisions separate for Quebec. So by us stating that this national system of need-based grants needs to run through the Canada Student Loans Program, we're by de facto endorsing the system that currently exists, and that's a separate system that is negotiated with Quebec. So that is reflected in a lot of the other research that we've put forward. It's reflected already in the current system of the Canada Student Loans Program. In regard to the Post-Secondary Education Act, we have worked closely with the Canadian Association of University Teachers. In that draft legislation, there is a specific reference to Quebec's ability to opt out of it. That's reflected in our policy. It's also reflected in our research. I appreciate your comment about putting it directly into our finance brief. We were severely limited in terms of the amount of pages we were able to produce for the committee this year, but that is reflected absolutely in our policy.
very much. And now we'll move on to Mr. Wallace. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, witnesses, for coming. And my first question is for Ms. Mullen from York University. And I appreciate you letting us know how the system we put in place for those who are donating stocks and bonds to that system is actually working, and you're able to do that. Has your organization looked at what the if we were to move in the direction of adding land and buildings to that exemption, what that would cost the Treasury? Do you have any sense of what that would be?
We've been really challenged by that question to know how far it would extend. We tried to look at even gifts of ecological property to see what the impact might be. It's we had a very hard time predicting putting an actual quantitative number on gifts of security, so we've not been able to identify that yet.
Okay. Was there any consideration of doing it on a gradual basis, in the sense that if I have a piece of land that I'm donating to York, I might not be able to write off as a charitable donation 100% of the value, but maybe part of it? Has that been looked at all?
We could look at that. We have not to date. We'd be very happy to sit down and talk about how we could implement this in a staged manner. We feel it doesn't need a staged manner. We think the Ecological Gifts program actually is a really good example of how it could work without having to stage it, but we'd be willing, very willing to sit down and talk about it.
Do you see that applying mostly to educational institutions, hospitals, like municipalities? Who's going to benefit from this if this happened to be?
I think educational institutions are one that would be well served by this provision, but we also see a real opportunity for small municipal organizations, rural-based organizations to receive gifts of property that they may turn around, those charities may turn around and sell and use for their programming costs, so not to retain the property. But we see it happening across the board.
Okay, my balance of my questions are for Amanda. I used to be president of the University of Guelph. I see it's one of your members. So, still, my first question is this: we previously, in the previous panel, had the universities and colleges organization here, associations, the management of those. Not one mention of it was all about research dollars and attracting postgraduate students. No mention of tuition or any access in their discussion. In your review that you've provided me here today and what you said, I just want to be clear. Are you asking us to wipe out tuition altogether, and that we would put anyone who graduates, it would go on their tax base for future years? Is that what you're actually advocating?
No, at this point, I mean, the reason I threw that in there was because right now there is a there is a focus on a user fee model, so that people pay upfront in order to participate in post-secondary education. And the difficulty with it is that it's creating these gross inequities when students graduate, depending on how much they need to borrow and how much they end up owing in the end. So what we're proposing is that we reduce those upfront barriers, reduce the need for students to borrow in the first place, to try and create a more equitable system. So this idea that, we're concerned with not just how many students are enrolled, but what kind of students are able to participate and how they're going to be able to repay their debt once they graduate.
I've had you guys in my office. I've had your colleagues who represent a different organization have a different attitude on the millennium, which I think has been mentioned. My view, and you tell me if I'm wrong, is instead of fighting each other on this item, why isn't there one program where the Millennium Program is grants, the student loan program is obviously loans. It's called loans, supported by the banks, I guess. The loans go to the banks now, right? But why isn't there? Can your two organizations not get together and come up with a plan for one that has a mix of loans and grants, and one administration to run it? I'm not necessarily convinced that having a third party doing it other than government is a bad thing. I've worked municipally where we've had third party organizations run stuff that's really municipal, but it's been very efficient and very effective in terms of leveraging other people to get involved. Like, what's the barrier from you guys getting together and figuring that out for us?
I'm really glad you asked that, because in fact our proposal is very similar to what you just suggested, and that's a mixture of grants and loans. being done by one central body. The problem right now with the way in which grants are being administered is that there is a whole confusing patchwork of different programs. And as a student, part of our proposal is to simplify that, right? And it's not just to simplify that from a student's perspective, but to ensure that there's efficiency and effectiveness from the government's perspective. And so our proposal, and the representative from the UCC just handed me one of their briefs, which also talks about the need for student financial assistance and need-based support. But our proposal very much does that, and that's proposes a grant loan package that's indivisible, that's provided to students at the time that they register, at the time that they are accepted to university and college.
Thank you very much. Now we have just time for 2 more questioners, but I'm going to split the time between them, 2 minutes each. A couple of quick questions here, and then to Mr. Paccetti, and then we'll go to Mr. DeMastro for the last 2.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for appearing. I'm going to ask the 3 quick questions, and then I'll have the chairman decide how to best manage the time. My first question is for Ms. Lefebvre. On the original tax leakage number that the government had, about $500 million, do you have any reports as to whether that amount is correct? Because from numbers we have, the government to date has lost about $900 million in revenue due to the certain trust funds being converted, sold, or being taken over by foreigners. So I'd just like your opinion on that. Mr. Barr, just what's happening with Bill 293? I know it's being held up in the Senate. Why is that happening? And Amanda, just quickly, I know you've been talking about lowering fees and things and access to grants, loans, but how do we increase enrollment? That's the big problem. In Quebec, we have the lowest tuition fees, but that's not helping. That's not helping increase enrollment. If you have any ideas, just specifically to enrollment. So.
Okay, this is how I'm going to do it. You've got about 15 seconds each, so very quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That information has been deposited with this committee on several occasions the last few times that we've been here. I'll be more than glad to pass it on to you after this meeting.
Thank you.
C-293 was introduced in second reading by Romeo Dallaire, who is the Senate sponsor of the bill, October 25th. Until today, but I'm happy to tell you today, Mr. Siegel responded for the government to Mr. Dallaire's speech, and so my hope is that the result will be that it will have been referred to Senate, but that Senate committee, but that was just happening as I arrived here, so I'm not able to tell you for sure. About 10,000 Canadians signed a petition asking the Senate to act on this.
Okay, now you've only got about 5 seconds.
Yeah, you should come talk to me after. There's, I think, a lot of different measures. One of them, obviously, is reducing the upfront barriers, but another are targeted programs specifically for low-income Canadians, for Aboriginal Canadians. I think there's a lot of specific measures that need to be done for those who are currently underrepresented in our system.
Okay, Margaret, that information, pass it through the clerk to him. Thank you. Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Yakubuski, I just wanted to come back to you specifically around HST. This is a big issue for me. I'm from Ontario. I've got a big manufacturing base in Ontario. I want to help that manufacturing base. Certainly, the effective tax rate that's brought about because of the PST, that's a real hindrance in Ontario, isn't it?
It is a real hindrance, and I think that we have to work away. You know, there's a new Minister of Finance in Ontario, and I think we've got to try to deliver the message. I can tell you that when we meet with him about various issues, we will certainly point out that this is a big lag for the Ontario economy, and that he should try to find ways of addressing it. Now, of course, I mean, I've had this discussion before. The Minister of Finance will tell you that it will cost Ontario a lot of money in the short term, and that basically that's a negotiating position, I take it, that needs to be worked on. And as I say, an innovative combination of the stick and the carrot has got to work at some point in time.
Thank you. Ms. Aziz, I had a good meeting with CASA. And I'll tell you, my mother was a financial aid officer at Trent University for quite a number of years. We did have a system of where you'd apply for OSAP, and that would qualify you for Canada student loans, grants, so on and so forth. We got away from that system. I'm really confused on Millennium, I have to be honest with you, because I have such conflicting views on it that I don't know what to make of it. Can you provide us with the information that you've cited specifically on Millennium, where you're getting it from? Because it is, we have one group saying it's 2% cost, and we have another group saying that it's just a mess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we've in the past circulated this information to both committee members and also to different caucus members, but absolutely we can provide that information. I mean, like for some of the numbers that we've been getting, we do a lot of access to information requests with regards to specific numbers. The one that I talked about with regards to this organization supporting the renewal, we just received through access to information. That's their own numbers. So we can share those documents with the committee, absolutely.
Yeah, and when you do share it with the clerk, and then we'll get that information to all committees. We want to thank the witnesses for coming forward and the committee for their questions. Meeting adjourned.